Dogs are called man's best friend for a reason. They will sacrifice themselves if it means saving the ones they love. Here are 3 horrifying stories that would have turned out tragic had a dog not been around. Number 3. I had to watch after my sister when my parents were out one night. I wouldn't be out anyway though. I was busy playing the current hit game that had just come out at the time. My dog Sheriff was laying next to me when he lifted his head up and his ears twitched. You know, that thing that dogs do when they hear something. I paused the game to see if I could hear what he was listening for. I didn't hear anything and lost interest, assuming it was someone walking their dog outside or something. Sheriff jumped off the bed and ran out the half-open door to the bedroom. He was barking, going crazy at something. I didn't care to follow him. I simply yelled at him to shut up. But eventually, his normal annoying barking suddenly turned crazed and defensive, as if he were confronting something, or someone. That's when I got suspicious and ran to go see what it was. I heard a Sheriff's nails scrape the basement steps as he flew down the stairs. My heart sank as I realized he must have been chasing something. I found myself standing at the top of the basement steps for a whole minute, staring into the darkness below, gathering up the courage to go down there. I finally did, turning the light on the way down. Sheriff was standing by the door to the laundry room. I didn't even dream of opening that door. I trusted in him enough to believe that someone was in there. I struggled, but eventually picked him up and ran with him all the way back upstairs. As I was about to shut the light, I heard the sound of the laundry room door creaking open. At that instant, I slammed the basement door shut and locked it. I listened for a few moments with my ear against the door, and I could hear, barely over the sound of Sheriff barking, the sound of the steps squeaking. I dove for the phone and called the police. When they arrived, they caught him trying to bust out through the basement window. Me and my sister watched as the officers walked him out to the car, and I'll never forget the dreadful stare the man gave me as he was forced into the backseat of the police car. But I'll also never forget how grateful I was to have Sheriff with me that night. Number 2. I used to have a Beagle Pointer mix before she passed away at the age of 11. Her name was Mandy, and she was the sweetest and most loyal dog a person could ask for. She would never harm a fly, but she did have a big troublemaking mouth. So the story goes, I was 15 years old, getting ready for sleep one night like any other night. Mandy slept in my room, and when I walked into my room, finally ready to crash in bed, I was greeted to Mandy growling. She wasn't looking at anything in particular. I playfully asked her what was wrong, and she just made an annoyed doggy sound before putting her head down. I found it funny. For the good hour of me rolling around trying to fall asleep, Mandy would constantly break the silence with growling. I would peek at her, but she would still have her head down. She showed no reaction to me offering to take her out, so I could check that off the list. It quickly went from cute and funny to just annoying, but I eventually fell asleep. I woke up to see that it was 2 a.m. and Mandy was growling. I tried to adjust my eyes in the dark, and I could eventually see Mandy standing in the middle of the room. She was looking up at my closet door. I felt my heart begin to race. What I was witnessing was flat out disturbing. I turned on the lamp and watched as Mandy continued to stare up at the elevated closet. I don't know what I was thinking, but I decided to open up the closet and check what she was barking at. I want to note right now I have one of those closets that lead to an attic. When I checked, there was nothing in the closet, but I noticed the attic door was cracked open. You can imagine the fear in my body as I ran to my parents' room to get my dad. He didn't seem to take me too seriously until he got to my room and saw Mandy growling and looking up at my closet. My dad is a big guy, so he went in there without a weapon. I sat there, worried for what was to come next. What came next was my dad screaming at the top of his lungs at somebody. I heard boxes fall over and glass shatter as my dad moaned in apparent pain. Somebody was rushing out of the closet. I hoped it was my dad, but instead, some 6'5" man with a hammer in his hand jumped out from the closet and passed me. What happened next still surprises everyone. Mandy jumped up and grabbed a hold of the man's arm with her teeth. The scream of the unfamiliar voice filled the room. My dad came rushing out of the closet just in time to jump onto the intruder, taking him down. He sent my mom to fetch my little brother's prop handcuffs. My dad held him down while I handcuffed him. Thankfully, he was sent to jail. I don't know what his intentions were, but obviously if he had a hammer with him, he probably wasn't just planning on robbing us. If we didn't have Mandy at that time, I could only imagine what would have happened to our family. Number 1. I was only 11 years old, and my brother was only 8. We were walking our dog Buster around the block in the dark. Buster was a husky German Shepherd mix. Upon turning the corner to the other side of the block, we ran into a tall man who greeted us with a smile. He stopped in his tracks and seemed to expect us to as well. It seemed he was trying to start a conversation, but we just kept walking past. My brother kept looking back, telling me that the man was following us. He was right. Each time I turned around, the man was the same distance from us, but he would stop looking whenever we looked. I motioned to my brother to walk faster. The faster we started to walk, it seemed the closer he got to us. We were approaching our house, but my heart stopped when I heard the muffled scream of my brother as he was grabbed and pulled away. Buster started barking like a rabid dog, and I shit you not, pulled the leash out of my hands and sunk his teeth into the man's leg. I could see the blood dripping down his leg as his screams caught the attention of the people inside their houses. Our neighbor came outside, and we explained everything while pointing at the man. The man began hopping away. I had to put the leash back on Buster to keep him from chasing him. My neighbor called the cops. She was a tiny little woman. She couldn't do anything to that guy even if she tried. She then walked to our door and told our parents what happened. Police came to question us and the neighbor. They caught the man limping down a sidewalk a few blocks over shortly after. One of the cops told us our dog was a hero, but we already knew that.
The town I grew up in was pretty country, to put it lightly. Nothing but farms, crops, abandoned churches, and ugly worn-down houses. Everyone around us was pretty broke. Property taxes were like $1,000 a year, if that. With that came a lot of sketchball characters. Hell, even our neighbor was a weirdo. Nice, but weird. We weren't well off ourselves, but things at least got a little better for my family when my siblings and I were old enough to work too. When this app Hot or Not was still a thing many years back, I matched this girl Kelly, who I started seeing for a while. We matched in late summertime, and we were seeing each other through September already. This was early October. Kelly and I were looking for a nice, cheap date to go on. Really, there wasn't much to do around there. We've gone on hikes, explored, and gotten food. Not much else going on. So we took a new route in the car this day, somewhere neither of us had been, just to find something. We found this little restaurant sitting in a random parking lot on the side of the road. It had outdoor seating, so we went there. It was a warm, cloudy day when we arrived and got seated at a table outside the restaurant. We were there for 45 minutes to an hour, and after leaving, it grew noticeably foggy out. We continued to drive down this route we'd never been down before, a really desolate road with just open fields and farmland on either side, with occasional patches of trees and woods. Then we passed something different. It was a sign for a pumpkin patch, only it was a very cheaply made sign. It wasn't some big billboard or anything like that. It was a wooden picket sign that said "Pumpkin picking this way," and an arrow pointing to the right. Right behind the sign was a dirt driveway cutting through the field. Through the fog, we saw a house that the driveway led to, so a spur-of-the-moment decision, we both agreed we wanted to check it out because why not? I drove off the road down the driveway, and we passed the house into this back area which was covered by trees in two directions, the left side and the far back side. Tucked between the house and woods was this big pumpkin patch. It was a genuine pumpkin farm, and we saw at least 200 pumpkins scattered all over the place, and that was just what the fog allowed us to see. We parked next to this old jalopy of a pickup truck, the only other vehicle visible on the property. We noticed an older couple sitting on the back deck of the house. As we got out, the two of them got up and greeted us. I said we're here for the pumpkin picking, and the old woman said with a smile, "Welcome, pick anything you'd like." I asked her how much it would be for a pumpkin, and the old woman said it's free. We were surprised. The fog was acting as a sort of barrier, so we couldn't clearly see the two. It was a little creepy, but I could still tell that it looked like the old man was smiling at Kelly. His smile was very gummy, it was kind of gross. We both said thank you, and started walking into the pumpkin patch. A lot of the pumpkins were on the smaller side, or mushy and just not very attractive. The ground was also kind of wet from the fog, I guess, and some of the pumpkins felt wet and muddy too. It was hard to find a really nice one, but eventually we did find one. I picked up this big, healthy-looking pumpkin. It was heavy. I brought it over to the back deck where the old couple just was. They weren't there anymore. I asked Kelly if we should just leave. She said probably. It really felt like we were clear to leave since we already thanked the couple and they made it clear they were free. So we got back in the car, and I started doing a 3-point turn on the dirt driveway to leave, when we heard someone yelling outside. We both got startled and turned to face the house, where we saw a middle-aged man in a cap yelling, "Hey, stop." I lowered the window, and he put his face through the window and yelled, "What the hell are y'all doing? I'm calling 911. I said, "What did we do?" And he said, "Put that pumpkin back right now." Kelly and I, talking over each other, both tried to explain to the man that the older couple told us to take whatever we wanted. I assumed they were his parents. The man said, "What older couple? What are you talking about?" I replied, "Are your parents also here?" He said, "I ain't got no parents." Kelly and I, both equally confused, looked at each other. I said, "Sir, there was an older couple sitting on your back deck 10 minutes ago, and they told us to take whatever we wanted." The man said, "There ain't no older couples here." He asked where the pumpkin is. I told him in the back. I unlocked the door and he grabbed the pumpkin. He said if we ever came back here, he'd shoot us, and then he spit at the ground and walked back to his house. I drove us out of there. We were as confused as could be. We considered the idea that maybe it was a joke, but that would be a real sick joke. I made a joke saying, "What if they were ghosts?" And Kelly said stop, clearly freaked out. But then I got the chills myself as I thought about what I just said. There was silence in the car for a few seconds, and I know we both pondered that idea. Out of curiosity, one day my 2 siblings went to that pumpkin farm to go pumpkin picking. They bought a pumpkin from the guy we saw, and they probed him a bit, asking about the farm and if the man lives there with anyone. The man said he lives there alone. This was unsettling to hear. It truly to this day doesn't make a lick of sense. Could the man have been lying about the older couple being there? I don't know. Possibly, but why? The scarier question is, what if he wasn't lying, and he truly does live alone? Then who were those people? It was late October when I woke up to one of my best friends, Connor, hitting me up asking if I was down to come to his house later. It was a Saturday afternoon and I was in high school at the time, so I spent most of my weekends with friends. Connor's parents were out of town for the weekend, and he was home alone with one of his older sisters, whom I'll just call Chantel. She was supposedly watching him the entire weekend. With that information, I knew he was just asking me to come over and party. Again, I didn't have any work responsibilities to worry about at the time, so I agreed to the idea and headed over to his house. When I got to his house, we played some Call of Duty on his family room's couch for a few hours, talking about school, sports, girls, and whatever else we cared about at the time. Eventually, he brought up the idea of going to a Halloween party in his neighborhood that a bunch of people from our high school were going to. At first, I was a bit hesitant of the idea, but after some convincing, I was down to go. I'm not introverted or anything, I just wasn't feeling like partying that night, but Connor was dying to go, so trying to be a good friend, I agreed to go. I asked him about getting some kind of costume, and he had 2 security staff shirts that we could just throw on and use as the bare minimum of a Halloween costume. We continued to play on Xbox for a few more hours until 10:30 rolled around. Connor ran upstairs to Chantel's room, telling her we were going, as if she cared. Then we threw on our shirts and headed out. After a quick 5-minute walk, we pulled up to a Halloween-decorated house where we could hear the music blaring from inside. We walked past the decorations and through the door where we were slammed with the loud music we heard outside. The place was packed with maybe 70 other high school kids raving and just talking in groups throughout the house. It was your average high school party. A few minutes later, I'd already lost Connor as I was pulled aside by Lino, one of my baseball teammates who I'd hardly seen at all that year. He sat me down on a couch in a circle with some of my other friends and teammates. We continued to talk for a couple hours, laughing at dumb memories brought up in conversation and partaking in activities that normally go down at parties. At this point in the night, I was feeling tired and completely out of it. I knew it was time for me to go home and get some rest for the night. I looked through the party for Connor, where he was flirting with a girl in the corner of the kitchen. As I accidentally interrupted his conversation, I asked him if it was cool for me to go back to his house and sleep. He agreed and said he was going to stay for a little longer, but the girl he was talking to asked if I could go get some drinks from the basement. I agreed to do so after realizing I completely interrupted their deep conversation. It was the least I could do. It didn't take me long to find the basement, as I opened the door and headed down the dimly lit stairs. I stumbled down the last few steps and fell into the fridge. As I opened it, I was greeted by a man's voice behind me, who tried quietly saying boo. I jumped and threw my hands up, facing the direction I heard the voice from. There was a tall, 35-year-old looking man wearing a black cloak costume and standing behind me with a grin on his face, making a surprise gesture with his hands. "What the hell was that for?" I yelled, with a clear slur in my speech. The guy laughed and introduced himself as the party host's cousin. I was so out of it, I didn't even question why he was in a dark basement by himself, and there was a massive party going on upstairs with loud music. The guy awkwardly tried making conversation, but I told him I needed to get my friend his drink and leave the party. I'm honestly pretty open and chatty to strangers when I'm out of it like that, but even at that moment, I didn't like his vibe, and I tried everything I could to get away. He blurted, "Nice meeting you," as I turned around, walking up the creaking stairs. I told my friend goodbye and left the party. The lights and Halloween decorations on each house in the neighborhood lit up the street as I walked back to Connor's house. It didn't really matter though, because the walk was literally 5 minutes at most. I reflected on the weird exchange I had with that man in the basement as I walked, and I couldn't shake the odd vibes he gave off. The more I thought about it, the weirder it became in my head. I eventually got to Connor's house. It was completely dark, and Chantal's car was gone from the driveway, meaning I was home alone. I walked into the dark, eerie house and didn't bother turning on some lights, just headed straight to the basement to sleep. I walked down there and passed out on the couch. I lay like a baby for maybe 15 minutes until I heard a crashing noise upstairs. It woke me right up. I tried listening for anything else, but I heard nothing. I thought I was hearing things, then tried getting back to sleep. I don't know how much time passed from when I first heard the crash, but I could hear the floorboards above me creaking like someone was walking on them. I thought it was Connor or Chantal, but it sounded way too heavy to be either of them. I pulled out my phone and texted Connor, asking if he was home yet. I stared at the ceiling, trying to listen. The door to the basement opened. I could hear a person walk down the staircase. I peeked around the bend of the room to see the stair opening. I saw the man I saw earlier at the party, standing right there, quietly, illuminated by the stair light. I tried not to make any noise, praying that the man would just walk away. A few moments passed by before he randomly turned and quietly walked out of the basement, closing the door. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. I explained the situation to them, gave them everything they needed, and I waited patiently in the basement for them to show up. I tried opening the windows down there, but they were all sealed shut. I had no escape through the basement door that the man was standing by earlier. The cops eventually came, and they arrested the man because he was still there. He was found hiding underneath Chantal's bed. She had gotten home and was getting ready for bed, and was moments from getting into the bed when she heard the cops knocking on the front door downstairs. I have no idea what his intention was, but clearly he followed me home. The whole encounter has really confused me. I'm just glad things played out the way they did. Oddly enough, the cops were able to review neighboring houses' cameras, and they saw the man following me home, but then he lost me after taking the corner into the cul-de-sac. He ended up lurking on Chantal, watching her get out of her car and walk into the house. Then he snuck around to the backyard and broke in through the back door. Always be alert of your surroundings. It was the middle of October. The leaves were just starting to change to that beautiful mix of orange and yellow. My wife Courtney and I are a gay couple. We've been married for 2 years now. We wanted to take advantage of the fall foliage and go to the Catskill Mountains in New York. We booked an Airbnb by Overlook Mountain, a popular hiking destination. We're avid hikers, so we go all over the country to explore national parks and famous hiking destinations. This was our third time going to Catskill, New York. The owner of the Airbnb was an adorable-looking sweet woman who was definitely in her 50s or 60s. Out of respect, I'll just name her Kathy. Kathy was very easy to work with and very responsive. She had the key to the little house hidden in a code-locked mailbox, and she gave me the code. Inside was a very rustic and cabiny type of feel, with wooden walls and floors, but bright-colored rugs to cover the wood floors. It was well kept and nice, spacious enough for 2 people. Outside was woods in all directions. There was a shed converted to a little clubhouse outside, with a pool table and dartboard and a bunch of things hung on the walls. We drove to the base of the Overlook Mountain Trail, and there were some people around. Not many, but a few. As we were ascending the mountain on foot, we'd pass occasional hikers on their way down. Eventually, we sat on a big rock overlooking an amazing cliff view, just admiring for a while. Eventually, we heard a footstep crunching a leaf behind us. We turned around and saw a woman by herself, leaning on a tree. She was like 55 or something. She was clearly looking at us until we turned and saw her. Then she awkwardly looked away. I would have otherwise said hi, but she made it weird. We just ignored it, until randomly we heard her say hi. So we turned again and saw she was looking at us. We said hi back. Then she asked where we're from. From here, we just got into a seemingly normal conversation with her. She said her name was Melinda, and she was from the area. She asked where we're staying, offering her knowledge of the area to suggest places to check out. I told her right up the road at an Airbnb. She suggested some places to go, and then the conversation kind of died off from there. Courtney and I said, well, it was nice meeting you, as we now started descending the trail back towards the car. Weirdly, we noticed the Melinda lady was now also heading down as well, but she was keeping a bit of a distance, not within earshot. We found a spot to rest on the way down for a minute, and we noticed Melinda seemed to stop too at the same time. She was still out of earshot. This was weird. We felt like she was following us, so we decided to just stay put and wait her out, see if she'd move. After a while, she finally did continue making her way down, past us. She looked at us and smiled and said okay as she walked past us. We waited till she was out of sight before we continued hiking down. We got back to the parking area a while later, and from there we went straight back to the Airbnb right up the road. We were exhausted, so we took a nap. Then we went out to eat at this place called Garden Cafe, which was highly rated. After that, it was pitch black out, so we went back to the Airbnb with plans to just cuddle up and watch movies. We had a long day of hiking, so we were going to sleep good. There was only a TV in the living room, but it was set up to have Netflix and everything, so we found a good movie to watch and put it on. We were so tired that we started drifting off to sleep halfway through the movie. I noticed Courtney was completely knocked out, and I was following suit, when suddenly, I was immediately snapped back awake to the sound of knocks at the door. We were in the middle of the woods. Knocks at the door were a huge concern. Nobody should be here. There was no peephole in the door. I couldn't check who was there. All the blinds were closed, and I wasn't going to dare peeking out of one of them. I shook Courtney awake and told her someone's at the door. I muted the TV, and we waited for a second set of knocks that came only seconds later. We both agreed there's no shot we were opening the door. It was still early, like 9 o'clock, so I texted Kathy asking if she was at the door. There was then a knock at the window, and a woman's voice on the other side asking if someone in there. Courtney and I were now freaked out. I'd say we were in a panic. Knocking on a stranger's window is not a normal thing somebody does. What happened next was even more disturbing. We heard the person trying to lift open the window. Thankfully, it was locked. Kathy was calling me now. I showed Courtney and she said maybe it is her outside, that's why she's calling. I picked up in a low voice, and Kathy on the other end told me she was at home, and she asked who was outside. When I told her what's happening, she sounded confused and concerned. None of her friends or relatives would go to that house, she said. She told us don't open the door, and we took her advice. After hanging up, there were now knocks on another window, and the voice called, "I need help, please let me in." We knew better than to fall for this. Something bad would happen if we let them in. We started to realize it could have been that weird lady from the hiking trail. Like, what if she followed us back to the Airbnb? We honestly wouldn't have even noticed. I went to the bedroom where it was completely pitch black, and I ever so delicately moved the blind up just a crack to peek outside. There was a man walking past the window. He didn't notice me. I went back to Courtney to tell her that there were multiple people out there. This was an invasion. We called 911. I gave them the address and stayed on the line. There were a few more knocks at the door, but we never answered. The people outside eventually gave up, I believe, because the knocks and yells stopped. The police took a while to get there, but when they did, we felt a lot better. The officers were very nice, and they stayed with us while we figured out what we wanted to do. I called Kathy again and explained what happened and why we didn't feel safe staying there tonight anymore. She was completely understanding. We still paid for that night, but the rest of the stay was canceled, and the officers stayed with us while we packed our things and loaded the car. One of them led us in his car to the nearest motel where we stayed for the night. Given the circumstances, we drove home the next day because, honestly, we just didn't want to be in the area after that. We think this was some kind of group that was looking for easy targets to abduct and may have been using a woman as some kind of scout to gain their trust, and they saw two young women by themselves, so they tried to target us. For future hikes, we've started to bring pepper spray with us just as a form of self-defense. This video's theme is restaurant stories because of today's sponsor, Factor 75, which is a service that lets you skip all the shopping, cooking, and cleaning by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. Factor's meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy, then get back to your daily routine. And if you're looking for calorie-conscious options during the busy fall season, you can try delicious, dietitian-approved Calorie Smart meals with around or less than 550 calories per serving. Factor also offers Gourmet Plus meals as part of your weekly options, which is perfect if you're craving something a little more special with your meal plan. With Gourmet Plus meals, you'll get a side of premium produce like broccoli and broccolini to go along with your choice of protein. And keep an eye out for Surf and Turf meal options coming soon. I personally love to cook, but sometimes finding the time to cook and food shop is a luxury. So for me, Factor has made life easier and gives me more time to do other things and stick to my goals. If you're interested, head to factor75.com or click the link in the description and use code NIGHTMARE50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. When I was 25, I went on a solo trip to Rio de Janeiro. My favorite DJ would be there that weekend, and I always wanted to go anyway. I've traveled solo many times in my life and never had any issues. Airbnbs aren't expensive a little outside of the city, and the one I was staying at was very nice and comfortable. It was its own little one-floor house, but the whole inside was very modern and clean. The Friday that I landed, I unpacked at the Airbnb, grabbed dinner, and went to the rooftop venue where the DJ would be performing. The first day and night all went well, and I met some really cool people at the rooftop. James, Ethan, and Jess. Ethan and Jess were dating. James, I guess, was third wheeling on the trip. The next day, I met up with them as they were also on a trip here. We got brunch together, then we checked out some of the sights together, like the Christ Redeemer and Sugarloaf Mountain, and then we hit the beaches. Unfortunately, they had tickets that they had already bought to another show that night, which I couldn't go to, so I was back to my solo ventures, which was fine. I still found things to do. Eventually, when I was hungry, I walked back in the direction of the Airbnb towards the outside of the city. On the way back, I stopped at a restaurant I found. I can speak a little Portuguese, but I'm by no means fluent. So I tried to keep to places where people seemed to speak English while I was alone. The menu on the window had some English writing, so I went inside. This restaurant was kind of small and dark. A lot of the restaurants in the area were expensive, but this one seemed affordable, so I stayed. The dining space was very long and narrow. It wasn't really busy. There were a few people sat further down at a couple tables. Then there was a man seated at a table basically next to mine. He was about 50. I wondered if he was another tourist. He and I were the only two people seated alone in here. The server came over and initially spoke in Portuguese, and I asked in Portuguese if he speaks English, and he said yes. From there on, I ordered in English. I noticed the man at the other table, looking over, watching as I ordered. It was kind of weird. When the server walked away after taking my order, the man said in English with a Portuguese accent that my Portuguese sounded good. I said thank you, and he started talking to me in Portuguese, as if giving me a lesson. I think he thought he was coming off as charming, but it was annoying and creepy. I kept looking down at my phone to act distracted, but he'd keep talking to me, both in English and in Portuguese. I'd humor him to be nice and not create awkwardness, and I tried my best to converse with him in Portuguese, as he'd correct my mistakes while trying to speak. The conversation was basically where I'm from, why I'm here, what I did today, and where I'm staying. I kinda just made up that I'm staying with a friend. What really creeped me out was when he told me how sexy I am when I talk in Portuguese. I was hoping he was leaving soon, but a part of me died inside when I saw the waiter bring him his food. Luckily, my food didn't take long. I got some pork stew dish. The man asked how it was. I told him fine. He stopped talking as much now that he was eating, thank God. I ate quickly. When I was done, I hurriedly asked for the check just because I didn't want to converse with this man anymore. The man also asked for the check right after I did, which I found so annoying and strange. He wasn't even done eating. Once I paid, I got up and walked out. The man said something in Portuguese, but all I said was bye and kept walking. It was dark out now, and the streets were a little less lively. I was walking for a while when I came to an intersection. While waiting to cross, I noticed the man from the restaurant across the street. He was definitely looking at me, but looked away the opposite direction when I noticed him. Maybe he had to walk the same way. It wasn't that unlikely. I continued to walk back, and as I was getting closer, I kept turning back just to see if he was still in sight. He wasn't. I arrived to the Airbnb. I got to the front door and looked around one more time, and I noticed way down the block, that man standing on the corner by the intersection. He was staring in this direction. I felt my heart drop. He was following me. I let myself inside the house and locked the door. Then I closed all the blinds. Now he knew where I was staying. I panicked and called my dad and told him. He told me to just be alert and make sure everything is locked, and to maybe keep a knife by me. It was a Saturday night, and my flight wasn't until late the next day, so I did want to go out. Eventually, I called an Uber to a bar in the downtown area, and I went to a venue having a house music night. I was there for maybe a couple hours before calling an Uber back to the Airbnb. When I got back, I let myself into the house kind of drunk. I sat down on the couch just to relax for a bit, but I noticed something. I heard the sound of the outside, and then I saw the blinds to one of the windows blowing from the breeze. The window in the kitchen was open. I had all the windows shut because the air conditioning was running. I immediately knew to get up and leave the house quickly. I called the emergency number and did my best to articulate to the operator in Portuguese that there was a home break-in. The police showed up in a matter of minutes, and I came out from behind the bush I was hiding in across the street when they did. One of the police officers did speak a little bit of English, so I was able to tell him that the window was opened and I was being followed earlier. The police entered the house and yelled things I didn't understand. The moment I saw them walking outside with a man from the restaurant in handcuffs was the most shocking moment of my life. The mix of emotions I felt, disbelief yet relief, but also horrified. If I hadn't called the cops, if I had gone into the bedroom where he was probably hiding, I didn't even want to think about it. He was taken away, and I never had to see his ugly, creepy face again. I'm glad he was stupid enough to not close the window behind him. I should have listened to my dad and locked all the windows as well. I just never imagined he would actually climb through one, though. I left the next day, and haven't returned to Brazil since. It was the holidays. Most of my friends were away, so I had decided to look for a part-time job to earn a bit of money. After waiting around for about a week, I finally got a call from a nearby restaurant asking me to come in for a trial. I had a fair bit of waitering experience, so I wasn't too surprised when the owner offered me the position. The place had a really creepy atmosphere to it. It was small, dimly lit, and every so often, a terrible smell would circulate through the air. It wasn't somewhere I would have usually gone for, but I needed the money and kept reminding myself that I'd only be here until college started back up. Anyway, it was around 10 p.m., and I was out the front by myself, cleaning the cutlery while I waited for the last table to leave. It was a table of 4 big guys. They were pretty rough looking. In fact, if I passed them on the street, I would have assumed they were homeless. Half an hour passed, and they finally got up to leave. I smiled as one of them came to the register to pay. "That's $42.50 altogether," I said. He immediately handed over a bunch of crinkled notes with a big grin on his face. Unfortunately, I had seen this kind of look before and braced myself for the cheesy pickup line. He said to me, "You doing anything tonight, cutie?" bringing himself closer to the register. "Thank you, have a good night," I replied, trying to make it clear that I was not interested. He laughed and walked out the door, mumbling something under his breath as he went. As soon as he was out of sight, I quickly cleared the dishes, cleaned down, and got changed out of my staff uniform. I waved goodbye to the last kitchen hand as I walked out the door and into the night. My house was only a couple of blocks away, so every night I walked to save gas. I had only walked for about 5 minutes when a loud whistle startled me. I looked off into the direction it came from and froze in fear. It was the same guy from the restaurant. He was on the opposite side of the street, signaling for me to come over with a large grin on his face. I took a pause before my instincts kicked in, and I started to quickly walk away. My house was still about 10 minutes away, and I could feel him getting closer with every step. Terrifying thoughts were racing around in my head, knowing very well that this could end badly. I turned the corner and started to sprint down the footpath. I felt tears gather up in my eyes as loud footsteps followed closely behind me. I didn't look behind out of fear, when all of a sudden a hand firmly grabbed my shoulder and yanked me backwards. I turned to see the man. His face was red, and his grin had morphed into a furious expression. He put his finger up to his lips. "Don't scream or I'll cut you," he whispered. At this point, I was ready to accept my fate, when out of nowhere, I felt a sudden burst of rage explode inside of me. I grabbed his face and dug my nails deep into his eyes. The man let out a loud, horrible noise as he clenched his face in pain. I took this chance and made a run for it. I ran all the way back to my flat, and after struggling to put the key in the door, I managed to get inside. As soon as I shut the door, I collapsed down onto the ground out of exhaustion and started to cry. My roommates all rushed down the stairs to see if I was okay. After walking me to a couch, I explained what happened. They were all shocked, whilst at the same time happy to see that I escaped from the man. I rang up the restaurant and quit the next day. It was a shame, really. The owners were so kind, and I really didn't mind the place. But I was too terrified to return, knowing that that man could be waiting for me. I've started back at college now, and I'm slowly recovering from that incident. Sometimes I do get nightmares just thinking about what may have happened if I hadn't attacked that man like I did. I was 19 and strapped for cash, so I temporarily took a second job working as a waitress at a diner. It was open till 3 a.m. on weeknights and 24 hours on the weekends. On the weekends, it was always a bunch of drunk kids at night that would come after they left the bars. During the week, most people that came late night were people working overnight shifts or just getting off from work. I would do the overnight shifts twice a week. Anything more than that, I probably would have passed out from a lack of sleep. I'd be the only server past 10 o'clock on the weekdays because there wasn't an abundance of customers, especially at the later hours of the night. One night, a larger man came in alone, around like 1 a.m. There was only one other customer in the restaurant at the time, I believe. I seated him. He started talking to me in a flirtatious way right away. It was always the older, unattractive ones that would be the most flirty. I had to deal with it with a smile though, as I basically was working on tips. He ordered a burger and a milkshake. Then he told me his name, Trevor. Trevor would keep staring at me from across the diner as I would be sitting doing things on my phone. He was the only customer left at this point now. He called me by my name over to the table. I went over with a smile, and he asked for the check. He left after paying, and when I went to collect the tip and clean the table, I noticed along with the $5 tip, he left his number and a winking face on the bill. Gross. I crumpled it up and threw it away. I thought that was the end of Trevor and I's story, but it wasn't. A few nights later, in came Trevor again, super late at night when no one else was in the place. I greeted him and sat him to a table. He actually hit me with a "how's my favorite server doing tonight?" which was odd considering I only served him one time. He again started some conversation with me, and I was way too exhausted for this, but I had to put a smile on my face and entertain it. I thought maybe this time he'd give a better tip if I acted interested, but that backfired. because he mistook my friendliness as interest and invited me to come on his boat sometime. I asked what kind of boat it is to play along, and he showed me a picture of this tiny little thing that could barely fit 2 people based on the looks of it. I said, "Oh wow, my dad has a boat too." I should have said boyfriend looking back now, but I was trying to get a good tip out of him. He asked for my number, and I told him I'm not allowed to give customers my number. I could get fired. He actually believed this, but after he left, he once again left his number on the bill, this time with a note saying something along the lines of, "I bet you were just shy last time. Don't be shy this time, you can text me. It'll be our little secret," followed by another winking face. He again only tipped $5. This guy was a creep who didn't even tip well. I hope to not see him again. But this wouldn't be a story if I didn't. He came in the next week on another night I was working. It had to be like 2 a.m., and it seemed like he'd always come in right as the place would become empty. Almost like he was sitting in the parking lot, waiting to come when I wouldn't be serving any tables. This time he came in, and the first thing he said was, "You don't call her, right?" But he didn't say it with a smile, he said it with a serious face. I told him I'm really flattered, but I really can't text customers. He didn't say anything, he just walked out. I was relieved, honestly. I'd rather he just stopped coming in. The next day, while at my other job, I got a text from one of the other waitresses asking if I knew who the fat bald guy was. I said, "Yeah, he's so creepy. Why?" She told me that he asked for my full name. I asked her if she gave it to him, and she said yes. I was honestly really upset, and this made me uncomfortable. She said that he claimed he just wanted the name of the really amazing waitress from last night. Later that day, I got a text. It was from Trevor. He said, "Hey, it's Trevor, your favorite customer. I know you said you can't give your number out, so I took it upon myself to get it myself. Now you didn't break any rules, haha." I was at a loss for words. I blocked the number and hoped that would be the end of it. But later that week, after I got off from work, I found an envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. I grabbed it and got in my car. Its contents were disturbing. It was a bunch of pictures of me in the diner, taken from the parking lot. The pictures got more disturbing though, when they started being of my apartment and of me standing on my front deck or unlocking the front door. Most disturbing of all was a picture taken through the front window at night. I drove straight to the police precinct with the photos to report this. These pictures, accompanied with the text I received from him, was damning enough. I stayed at my parents' house that night, and the next day, a detective called that Trevor guy and told him if he continued to contact me, it would be considered harassment and he would be arrested. I still quit the job at the restaurant just to be safe. My lease was up the next month, and so I moved to a new apartment. I didn't want to have any chance of that man finding me again. He was the first and only true stalker I've ever dealt with in my life. I'm 29 now, and I've had a lot of horrific experiences, but nothing sits in my brain the way one night from when I was 15 does. It was my first real babysitting job that wasn't just watching a cousin for an hour while my aunt ran to the store. This was a family friend, the kind where your parents know their parents, and everyone assumes it's basically safe by default. They're cool with me telling this story online, so their names are Mark and Diane, and their son Charlie was 5. They lived in a nice house in a quiet, normal neighborhood. Looking back, that's part of why it messed with me. It didn't feel like the kind of house where anything bad could happen. It felt like a normal place, like where I grew up. It was a Friday night in early fall. My parents dropped me off around 6:30, and Mark and Diane were already dressed up. Mark shook my hand like I was applying for a job at his office, and Diane kept calling me a lifesaver. Mark and Diane went over the basics, like when we eat, what we eat, when his light's out, and keeping his door cracked open. If he has to use the bathroom, walk him there, because he sometimes gets scared in the hallway at night. Mark also pointed out the locks. There was a front door lock they never used because they came in through the garage. The back door, though, was the one I'd use if I needed to step out onto the deck. He mentioned I'd have to lock both the locks, and he pointed to the deadbolt up top and the regular doorbell lock underneath. I nodded like I understood. I thought it was obvious. I thought a lock was a lock. They left around 7. As soon as their car pulled away, Charlie asked if we could play board games and hide and seek. And the hide and seek I tried to talk him out of because the house was bigger than I expected, and I didn't want him hiding somewhere stupid and getting hurt. We compromised by playing a simple card matching game at the coffee table, then a video game on the little console in the family room. It was one of those kids games where you basically just run around collecting stuff and the character can't really die. Around 7:45, I heated up the food Diana had left. It was mac and cheese and chicken nuggets, basically babysitter cheat code. Charlie ate in front of the TV, which his parents probably didn't normally let him do, but I wasn't trying to be the strict babysitter on my first paid job. After dinner, we brushed his teeth and went to his room. His room was on the 2nd floor. The house had this wide hallway that ran past a couple bedrooms and a bathroom. Charlie's room was at the end, and it had a small closet with sliding doors. Inside, from what I could tell earlier when he grabbed a toy, it was mostly little kid clothes and some storage bins on the top shelf. His room had a hamper in the corner by his dresser, one of those tall ones with a lid. There was a nightlight on his dresser that glowed soft yellow. I tucked him in and read him a short book, and as I was walking out, he asked if I'd stay in the hallway for a minute. I stood outside his door and listened to him rustle around for maybe 30 seconds. Then his voice went quiet, and I figured he was settled. I left his door cracked like they said. Diane had showed me the guest bedroom where I could hang out once Charlie was asleep. It was down the hallway from Charlie's room, closer to the stairs. It had a small TV, like a spare room TV, and a bed with a comforter that looked like it was never used. I turned the TV on and flipped through the channels until I found some random show. I lay on top of the bed, shoes off, phone in my pocket. It felt like the job was basically done, but that lasted maybe 40 minutes. I was half watching the TV when I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. I looked up, and Charlie was standing in the doorway of the guest room. He was rubbing his eyes and holding his stuffed animal. His face didn't look sleepy though, he looked scared. I asked what was wrong. He didn't come in at first, he just whispered, "Chris." I motioned him over, and he walked in slowly, like he didn't want to turn his back to the hallway. He said he heard something in his closet. I tried to assure him it was likely a house settling noise, that houses creak a lot. He shook his head fast, saying no, it was more like a scratch. I still knew it had to just be typical toddler imagination. I told him there were no monsters in his closet and asked if he wanted me to check. He nodded, and I walked him back to his room. I turned his light on fully and looked at the closet. The sliding doors were closed. I slid one open and peeked inside. Admittedly, I took just a quick peek because I knew no one was in there, and I just saw a bunch of clothes. I even pushed some clothes aside like I was actually searching. I slid the door closed and saw relief on his face. I tucked him back in and went back to the guest room, but 15 minutes later, I heard footsteps again. This time Charlie came in quicker, and he was more upset. He said, "Chris, the closet door moved." I sat up and tried not to show annoyance, even though I felt it for a second. I tried to stay patient. I said, "Okay, let's go check." We walked back down the hallway, and when we got to his room, I stopped in the doorway. The closet door was fully open. One of the sliding panels was pushed all the way to the side. I stared at it for a second, and I remember my stomach doing this little drop, not because I thought someone was in there right away, but because it didn't match what I remembered. I knew I closed it. I looked at Charlie and asked why he opened that in a tone that would imply I'm not happy, but the way he swore he didn't, it didn't come across like he was lying. I walked over and slid the closet door shut, but the thing is, the way it closed, it didn't feel like it could have drifted open on its own. I gave Charlie a look meant to imply that I knew he was playing around with the door, maybe trying to scare me. I tucked him back in and told him he was fine and to go to sleep. I left the room, and on the way back to the guest bedroom, I caught myself listening for sounds behind me, like someone was walking in the hallway. I told myself to stop being stupid. I was 15 in a family friend's house on a safe street. About 10 minutes later, Instead of footsteps, I heard Charlie call out. It wasn't a scream, but rather a shaky raised voice like he was trying not to yell but needed me. It came from his room. I got up and walked out. As I got closer, I could hear him crying softly. I stepped into his room and saw him sitting in bed with tears on his face. I immediately looked at the closet. The door was closed. That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. I said, "Hey buddy, what happened?" He didn't answer right away. He just lifted his arm and pointed toward the corner of the room. I followed where he was pointing, and for a second, my brain didn't process what I was seeing. There was a hamper in that corner, and behind it, pressed into the narrow space between the hamper and the wall, was a person crouched down. They were hiding, trying to make themselves as small as possible. The first thing I saw was a shoulder, then the shoes, then his partially hidden face, but I could see his eyes looking straight at me. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds before my body reacted. I didn't scream. I simply decided it was time to move, so I grabbed Charlie with both arms, yanked him out of bed, and picked him up like he weighed nothing. I backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off that corner. The person surprisingly didn't move at first. They stayed crouched, as if they stayed still enough we'd forget he was there. I ran us toward the guest room and locked the door. I did my best to keep Charlie quiet as I called 911. I told the operator there was someone in the house. I gave the address and said I was babysitting, and there was a man in the kid's room. The operator asked if the intruder had a weapon. I said I didn't know. She asked if we were safe. I said we were locked in a bedroom upstairs. She told me to stay on the line. I kept expecting the doorknob to start turning or expecting the door to shake. The operator kept talking to me to keep me calm, asking me to describe the person, but I couldn't. All I could say was I saw the person's eyes hidden behind a hamper. The eventual sound of distant sirens getting closer was the first time I was ever relieved to hear police sirens in my life. The operator told me to wait until an officer came to my door and identified themselves. When the police finally came upstairs, one of them knocked and said, "Chris?" because I guess dispatch had my name. I unlocked the door and opened it, and 2 officers were there with flashlights. They looked past me into the room, then at Charlie. They had already done a sweep downstairs and didn't see anyone. They didn't have to kick the door down because the front door was wide open. They checked every possible hiding spot in the house. Whoever it was had left. They said based on the timeline, he probably slipped out fast when I ran, went down the stairs, and ran out the front door. When Mark and Diane got home, they arrived to the police cars outside and officers in their living room. A lot of emotions filled the room for sure. Mark asked me questions I couldn't really answer, just like the police did. A cop asked about the locks and entry points. Mark immediately went to the back door and checked it. I followed because I felt like I needed to see. The deadbolt at the top was unlocked. Mark looked at me and asked, "Did you lock both locks like I said?" I said, "I locked the bottom one." He said the bottom one pops if the knob gets jiggled. That's why he told me both. He wasn't raising his voice, but I knew he was upset. However, he didn't stay upset for long and was grateful I saved Charlie from danger. The worst part is thinking about what would have happened if Charlie hadn't come to get me, if he'd stayed in his room trying to be brave while that person was in there, or if I'd been downstairs messing around on my phone, not paying attention, or if I'd told Charlie to go back to bed without checking. So to parents or babysitters or anyone out there who takes care of kids, don't always dismiss the things they say as just their imagination. The third time I babysat AJ was the only time I was ever asked to stay overnight at someone else's house, and it's also the last time I ever babysat for anyone at all. I was 17, a senior in high school, and I had already watched AJ twice before. He was 8, quiet, and the kind of kid who didn't really look at you when you talked to him. The first time I met his mom, she told me he was a loner and mostly kept to himself, so I shouldn't expect much interaction. She said that like it was a good thing, like it meant the job would be easy, and honestly, the first 2 times kind of were. I barely had to do anything besides heat up food and remind him when it was time to get ready for bed. He'd just sit in his room playing video games like Grand Theft Auto for hours. The third time was different because his mom asked if I could spend the night. She said she had to be out of town for work and wouldn't be back until late the next morning. She sounded stressed on the phone, like she didn't have many options, so I said yes. I figured it would be the same as before, just longer and more money. When I got to the house that afternoon, she rushed through the instructions at the kitchen counter while AJ was already upstairs. She said there was frozen pizza in the freezer, and he usually fed himself breakfast cereal, and I could sleep in the extra room at the end of the hallway. She thanked me like 3 times before she even left. When she did, I called up the stairs to let AJ know I was there, even though he already knew, and he just yelled back a short "yeah" without coming down. For the next few hours, I barely saw him. I could hear the video games through the ceiling, the sounds of gunshots and cars crashing in his game. At one point, I went upstairs to check on him and found him sitting on the floor of his room, controller in hand, eyes locked on the screen. He didn't look away when I asked if he was okay. He just nodded while staring at the TV. I went back downstairs and tried to watch something in the living room, but it felt weird being in someone else's house overnight. Around 7, I made the pizza and called AJ down. When he came down, he didn't say hi or anything. He just grabbed 2 slices, looked at me with this expression I still can't fully describe, like I'd done something to annoy him just by existing, and then went back upstairs without a word. He was acting unfriendlier than usual this time. I stood there in the kitchen holding my own plate, feeling awkward and kind of unwelcome in a house I was supposed to be in charge of for the night. I figured he was just a weird kid and didn't take it personally. After I cleaned up, I went upstairs to get ready for bed. The guest room was basic and small. I left the door half open because I didn't like the idea of being fully closed in. I was sitting on the bed talking to my friend Bree when I got this strange feeling like I was being watched. I looked up and saw AJ's head slowly move back out of view from the crack in the doorway. He had just been standing there looking in. I laughed a little because it startled me more than anything, and I called out to him asking what he was doing. He didn't answer. I heard soft footsteps go down the hallway toward his room. I remember thinking it was kind of funny, like he was just being a nosy kid, and I didn't think much of it after that. Around 11, I put my phone down and turned off the lamp. I rolled onto my side and closed my eyes, trying to fall asleep. I don't know how much time passed before I felt like I wasn't alone in the room. I opened my eyes and saw a dark shape at the foot of the bed. It took a few seconds for me to process that it was someone standing there. I let out a scream before I could stop myself and scrambled for the lamp. When I turned it on, I saw AJ standing at the end of the bed, completely still. The look on his face is still hard to describe. He looked annoyed, yet also scared or regretful of what he was about to do. Both of his hands were behind his back. I sat up and asked him what he was doing in there. He didn't answer. I told him to show me what he had behind his back. He shook his head no, still not breaking eye contact. That scared me more than if he yelled or cried. I got out of bed and moved toward him, telling him he needed to go back to his room. When I reached him, I grabbed his arm and turned him slightly, and that's when I saw the handle of a large kitchen knife in his hand. That's when I screamed again and covered my mouth with my hand without even meaning to. I yelled at him to get out of the room, to go, to leave. My whole body was shaking. He didn't argue, he just ran out into the hallway, still holding the knife. I rushed to the door, slammed it shut, and locked it. I fumbled with my phone, trying to call his mom because my hands were actually shaking. When she answered, I could barely get the words out. I told her AJ came into my room with a knife while I was sleeping. There was a long silence on the other end. Then her voice changed completely. She sounded horrified, like she had been expecting something bad, but not this bad. She kept apologizing over and over, saying she was so sorry and that she believed me. I told her I couldn't stay there. I didn't care about the money or anything else. I just needed someone else to come watch him. She didn't argue at all. She said she would call her ex-husband and have him come right away. I stayed locked in that room for almost an hour, scared shitless. Eventually, there was a knock at the front door and a man's voice calling AJ's name. I cracked the guest room door and saw a man I recognized from a photo in the house. He went straight down the hall toward AJ's room without saying much to me. I grabbed my bag, walked past them without looking into AJ's room, and left the house as fast as I could. His mom sent me the money through Venmo later that night, along with another long apology, but I never went back there. I never even babysat for another family after that. I feel like I was actually close to becoming a news article online about a babysitter getting murdered by a child. I was 21 when my sister asked me to watch her kids overnight while she and her husband went to a wedding a few hours away. I'd babysat my niece Emma and my nephew Lucas plenty of times before, so it wasn't a big deal. Emma was 6, quiet and sensitive, and Luke was 9, more talkative but still easy. They live in a normal suburban house in a quiet neighborhood not far from our childhood home. My sister walked me through the usual routine before they left, since this time I'd be staying overnight. Leftover Chinese food for dinner, and no scary shows, and bed by 9. She reminded me Emma sometimes got nervous at night and might call for me once or twice. After they left, the kids and I ate in the living room and watched a movie. It felt like a completely normal night. Around 9, I took them upstairs. Their bedrooms were across the hall from each other, with a bathroom in between. I tucked Emma in first. She asked if I'd leave her door open a little and keep the hallway light on. Lucas just rolled over and told me goodnight like he was already half asleep. I went downstairs and turned on the TV, keeping the volume low so they wouldn't hear. Around like 9:30 to 10, I heard footsteps upstairs. I figured Emma needed something. I started up the stairs, but before I got halfway, I saw her walking along the balcony toward the top step. She was standing there in her pajamas looking down at me. I asked what was wrong. She said I already came in her room and told her to go back to sleep, but she hadn't been able to. I stopped on the stairs and told her I hadn't been upstairs since I put them to bed. She thought I was joking at first. She said I stood in her doorway a few minutes ago and told her everything was fine in a whisper. I told her maybe she was dreaming it, and walked her back to her room. I checked her closet and under the bed, even though I knew nothing would be there. She finally settled back in, but she kept watching me as I left, like she wasn't convinced. I went back downstairs, feeling slightly uneasy, but still telling myself kids mix dreams with reality all the time. About 20 minutes later, Lucas came down, rubbing his eyes. He asked why I came into his room. I felt a chill go through me. I told him I didn't. He said I stood by his dresser and looked at him, then walked out without saying anything. I tried to keep my voice calm and told him he must have been half asleep, but now this was weird, because both of them said pretty similar things. Instead of going back to bed, he stayed next to me on the couch now. That was when I started to really listen to the house. Every small sound felt louder. I turned the TV off, and the silence literally made my ears ring. Lucas noticed me doing this, and I think it started to scare him when I told him to shush for a second. I heard something upstairs. It was light footsteps running, and then I saw her running across the balcony upstairs and then racing down the stairs, screaming Uncle Dan a bunch of times. When she got to the living room, I asked her what's wrong, and she started crying, saying there's someone upstairs. I think this was around the time my heart really started racing. They weren't playing a little kid prank on me. She was crying genuine tears. I asked her why she thought there's someone upstairs, and she responded saying someone came in her room again and said goodnight, but it didn't sound like me. I think by now, I was internally freaking the fuck out, but I told them to keep calm. I didn't want Emma to cause Lucas to start crying now too. I told them to wait down here, I'll go check upstairs and be right back. And that's exactly what I planned to do. But I wasn't going up there without a weapon at this point. I went to the kitchen, secretly grabbed a knife, and placed it in front of me as I walked back into the living room and then up the stairs. The kids were still on the couch. I made it to the upstairs balcony that overlooks the living room. I did a little march as I walked across it to try to make them laugh, but it didn't work. As I passed the balcony and into the upstairs foyer that led to the kids' bedrooms, I can't iterate enough just how much I wasn't expecting what happened next. I heard something in Emma's room. I peered inside and thought I saw something or someone. I quietly said hello so the kids wouldn't hear, but I wasn't expecting someone to respond. In a very weird, high-pitched voice, yet still sounding like a grown man, someone said, "Aren't they just so special?" The voice sounded like it belonged to someone with mental issues, maybe not fully there. I then realized what I was seeing in the bedroom was a really tall person standing next to Emma's bed now. I guess like 6'4", they looked to be like 6 inches taller than me. My heart was in my throat. I turned and ran down the stairs and grabbed the kids. I told them, "Put your shoes on now, we're leaving," and Emma started to cry even more. I quickly saw why. Peering around the wall up the balcony upstairs was this grotesque-looking man doing peekaboo with his hands toward the kids. I said forget the shoes and ran the kids outside with me in their socks. We ran to a house a couple doors down where I saw lights on inside, and I rang the bell 5 times. The lady who answered knew Lucas and Emma. I introduced myself and quickly explained the situation. She let us in immediately into safety. I got on the phone with 911 and stood on the front porch of this couple's house watching my sister's house. And as I saw that man casually strolling out of her house, walking down the walkway into the darkness of the street in the opposite way, the 911 operator told me not to engage him in any way and that officers would be there soon. But boy do I regret listening to that operator. I should have followed that fucking creep down the street. I should have been a man and beaten him to a pulp. But realistically, I didn't know if he was armed or not, and based on his voice, I choose to believe it was some mentally handicapped person who simply walked right into the house. I stayed on the stoop watching the man until he disappeared down an intersecting street, and I told the operator which street it was. She kept making it seem like the cops would be heading down that direction, but it took so long for them to arrive that by then, that man was gone, possibly into one of the houses in the vicinity for all anyone would know. I wasn't happy with the response time, and I let the police know that. I went into my sister's house with them to investigate, and nothing seemed out of the sorts, nor was anyone else inside. Of course, given the circumstances, I drove the kids home to my parents' house with me that night to sleep there. We weren't going to sleep in that house that night regardless. And of course, there was somehow blame put on me that the one night I was watching them, someone breaks into the house. However, I firmly believe that man was in there before I even got there. I did not go needlessly unlocking doors or anything like that. Ever since then, my sister and my brother-in-law have been nuts with the security cameras. They have at least 6 all over the house, inside and out. But honestly, who can blame them after this? I live in the state of Washington, in the Pacific Northwest. I used to work at a late-night diner on the side of the highway. I was 29 years old. I worked the closing shift pretty often. The diner would close at 2 a.m., which was incredibly late considering how scarcely populated the area is. But even so, given the proximity to the highway, there would usually be at least 1 or 2 customers in the building until closing time. Having grown up in the South and moved up here, I can tell you the people are different. In the South, there's a huge emphasis on hospitality and small talk. But up here, people here are kind, but not overly friendly. I feel like the air lends itself more to introversion. I used to be a waitress down south, and I'm telling you from experience, the customers were a lot chattier down there. Up here, people seem to want to keep to themselves a little more. This was approaching closing time. The kitchen's last call was at 2 technically, even though the diner was advertised to close at 2. It was really frowned upon if a customer would come in and order something that late, but it did happen. It happened that night, as a matter of fact. There were only 2 employees in the building, myself and the chef. It was like 1:50 a.m., and in comes a lone, heavy-set man. He was wearing awkwardly high jeans, a gray shirt tucked in, a brown jacket, and he had a brown mustache and glasses. I asked him if he'd like to sit at the bar or a table, and he asked for a table. He kept smiling the whole time, so I smiled back. I gave him a menu and informed him the kitchen closes in 10 minutes. He looked at the menu for a few seconds, and then said he'd like a black coffee and some French toast. Around this time, he also introduced himself as Nolan. Luckily, his order was simple enough. I went into the kitchen and told the chef the order, who still had a slightly annoyed face in reaction, which I just responded to with, "I know." I stepped back out to the dining area, and Nolan waved me over. As I neared, he struck up a conversation with me, something rather unusual for folk around here at this hour. He asked me if I was from the area, and started complaining about all the potholes in the road around here. I responded, yeah, it's all the freezes we get in the winter. Basic small talk. I did tell him that I'm from around here, and he perhaps pressed a bit too specifically about where I was from. I told him a vague, general area. I never tell people exactly where I live, obviously. He said he just moved to town not too long ago. As he spoke, I analyzed his body language and character in general. He seemed like a somewhat nerdy older guy, and this may have been his idea of flirting. Didn't bother me much though. I dealt with it back home in the South all the time, so I was used to it. Since this was the last customer of the night, the chef personally came out and placed his food on the counter. I went to grab it and bring it to Nolan. By this point, he had his food and coffee, and everything else was about ready to close up shop. I wiped down the counters and tables and everything already. I stayed behind the counter, a little further away from Nolan, because I was tired of conversing with him. My social energy was drained, and I was ready to get home and go to sleep. When he finally finished his food, I went to drop off his check before he even asked for it, politely, non-verbally implying that we were closed and we wanted to get home. He paid by card, and then he left. The chef would be the one closing up the place, so after cleaning Nolan's table and gathering all my belongings, I said goodbye to the guy working in the kitchen and walked out to my car. There were 3 cars in the lot, mine, the chef's, and a third one that I couldn't explain. It was a silver, older looking car, like a 2005 Toyota or Audi or something. I wasn't sure. I also couldn't tell if the windows were tinted or if it was just so dark out that I couldn't see into the car. But I wasn't able to tell if someone was in the car or not. It was parked on the dirt closest to the highway. I wondered if it was Nolan's car. I got in my car and started heading home. The diner to my home is about 20 minutes. I was on the highway when a ding came from my dashboard and the tire pressure screen popped up. I started freaking out. I didn't know how to change a tire. I'd never even called my roadside assistance company. I was still a decent way from home. The tire pressure to my rear passenger side tire was dropping rather rapidly all of a sudden, from 20 down to 10, and then I started feeling not just the steering wheel shake, but the entire car shake. I had to pull off the road. I came to a stop and got out of the car real quick to look at the tire, and it was as flat as could be. Suddenly, as if they were just flicked on, a pair of headlights lit up the side of the road as it approached me, then slowing to a stop. I hurried back inside my car and locked the door. I truly didn't know what to do. And then there was a light tap at my window. I looked up and saw Nolan, the man from the restaurant. He waved at me with a smile. He was wearing gloves now. For the sake of the story, I'll use a fake name for myself. Nolan said through the window, "Kathy, is that you? Are you okay?" He laughed, acting like it was such a coincidence. I felt a knot in my stomach suddenly. I instantly knew he did this. I'm not a dumbass. He motioned for me to lower the window. I lowered it literally maybe 2 inches, just enough to speak through. He asked if I needed help. I told him I had a flat tire. He played dumb, asking me which one. I said the back passenger side. He started walking over to the other side, and at this moment, I dialed 911 on my phone. I let the phone sit on my lap as Nolan walked back to my side. He said through the window with his creepy smile that he knows how to change a flat. He asked me to step out of the car, and I said I'm waiting for my boyfriend to come and help me change it. During all of this, I heard the 911 operator speaking into the phone, but it wasn't loud enough for Nolan to hear it. I tried to make it as clear as possible my situation to the operator without being too obvious for Nolan to catch on. I basically said, I'm not sure how I got a flat, but I'm waiting for my boyfriend to come help me change it. Thanks for offering to help, sir. He stood there for a second with a much less friendly look on his face. Then he walked away from the window. I took this opportunity to speak very quietly into the phone that this man slashed my tire and he's trying to get me out of the car. The operator asked my location, and I quickly opened the map on my phone and told her the name of the road I pulled off onto. The deafening shattering of glass immediately to my left made me scream as shards of glass fell onto my lap. I screamed at the top of my lungs at the man. "I'm on the phone with the police. It's the police." As I showed him the phone screen, he looked at my screen and then reached inside the car. I screamed again at the top of my lungs as I was hysterically crying, expecting him to try and grab me or choke me. But instead, he grabbed my phone and launched it in the direction of the highway. He then ran back to his car and sped off down the dark road. I heard the screeching of his tires as he made a sharp right turn and then disappeared. I wanted to go look for my phone, but with no flashlights in the car, I'd be running out there to look in the pitch dark. The only light was from my car. I had no choice but to wait and pray that Nolan, or whatever his real name was, didn't come back. I'm very grateful that I was able to tell the 911 operator my location in time. I heard the unmistakable sound of police sirens in the distance, and I started to cry tears of joy when I realized they were getting closer. I got out of my car and started waving my arms in the air until I saw the flashing lights turn off the highway onto this random road. Pretty soon a second police car showed up, and then a third. During all this time, we found my phone, which was completely destroyed. I described the man to them along with his car and pointed the direction in which he went. One of the police officers left in that direction as they also put the word out on their radio. They were honestly the nicest cops I'd ever met in my life. They changed my tire for me, and one of them even gave me an escort home, having me follow from behind. The main officer told me that they would investigate the video surveillance from the diner and keep me updated with any news. I got a call a week later from that officer, informing me that the investigation was still ongoing based on the surveillance footage. That was the last I'd heard of it. I don't think they caught him, sadly. I never returned to that diner job again after that night. I was not risking that man ever finding me again. I'm a 15-year-old guy working at an amusement park in upstate New York. This only happened a year ago, and it still gives me chills thinking about it. It was a crisp October Sunday, one of the last few days the park would be open until it closed until May. It seemed like just another normal day at work. Boy, was I wrong. After checking in and working at my station for about 5 hours, I looked at my watch. 4:55 p.m. was the time. My shift ended in 5 minutes. I felt relieved and exhausted. As I began packing up my things, a man with a scraggly beard and messy hair approached me. He was wearing a gray t-shirt with a few stains on it and black sweatpants covered in holes. I thought to myself, I just need to get through this last one. "Can I help you?" I asked the man. He stared at me for a few seconds, and then he kept turning his head as if someone were following him. I was starting to get a little creeped out. "Sir, can I help you?" I repeated my question, starting to sound a little annoyed. He looked at me for a couple seconds, and finally responded, saying with a stutter, "Where are your bathrooms?" He said this in a whisper tone of voice. "Up the hill to the right," I responded cheerfully. The man started to walk in that direction. As he did, he kept turning and looking at me. I avoided eye contact, even though I was more freaked out than ever. Next thing I knew, one of my coworkers came to take my spot. I grabbed my things, practically sprinted through the park to the back room to punch out of my shift, and then to the bathroom. I changed out of my work clothes and headed to the employee parking lot. I sat on a bench and waited for my coworker Jordan, who was 17, to pick me up. After waiting for what seemed like hours, Jordan finally picked me up. Before going home, we went to the local diner to eat some cheeseburgers for dinner. While eating in the diner, I noticed something odd. The same man who I helped find the bathrooms at the park was at the diner, sitting a couple tables down, staring right at me. My heart skipped a beat. I told Jordan about it, and he just shrugged it off. "Probably just a coincidence, Ben, don't worry." "Yeah," I said, even though I was pretty concerned. After dinner, we got back in the car and started the 35-minute drive back home. At the first red light we came to, I saw something that made my heart skip another beat. There, sitting in his white Honda to the right of us, the man from the park and diner. Sure enough, he was staring back at me. I told Jordan, and he started to worry a little. After arriving to our street, we made sure to take a couple laps around the block to make sure that man wasn't following us. Once it was clear, Jordan dropped me off at home. My mom and sister were out at the mall, and my dad was on a business trip, so I was home alone. After immediately jumping into bed, I heard a noise at my window. I slowly got up and looked outside and saw something that will forever send chills down my spine. Right there on my front lawn was the man, looking right at my window, smiling. I immediately grabbed my phone and called 911, but once the police arrived, the man was gone. I immediately quit my job at the amusement park right after the park closed for winter. I haven't seen the man since this incident. This was an experience that I'll never forget. I was working a late night shift at the diner I worked at for a year. It was a rainy night. In fact, it was pouring. Nights like these usually meant less customers because people aren't exactly rushing to drive in the rain. I was expecting a slow night. It was for the most part. I was working until midnight. At some point closer to the end of my shift, in came a man and a woman significantly younger looking than him. He looked about 40. She looked like she were in her 20s. They both looked at me the second they walked in, and so I went over to greet them and ask how many. They said just 2, so I brought them to a table. They took a while to order, and I noticed they were talking really quietly to each other. After they did order, the man started striking up a conversation with me. I'm a generally talkative person, which was why I've always thrived in the hospitality industry, so I started chatting their ears off since it was a slow night anyway. Typical waitress-customer back and forth. The girl oddly didn't say much. The man did most of the talking, so I started directing my questions more to him. I can't remember every last thing we said to each other, obviously, but one thing that stuck in my head was when the man asked me, "Do you live alone?" I did live alone, and still do live alone. I answered his question honestly, saying I live about 10 minutes north up the road, and that it's really quiet and boring around here. At the time, I didn't see his question as any kind of red flag, albeit maybe a bit strange of a question, but something about a man being with another female makes you automatically assume they're not a threat. I made jokes about being stuck here forever and such, and then walked away from the table. I'd say about 45 minutes later, they finished and left. Fast forward probably an hour later, and we were closing up the place. I said goodbye to my coworkers and rushed to my car to avoid getting more soaked than I needed to from the rain. It was still pouring outside. I drove home slow because of the conditions. The second I got home, I ran straight to the front door and let myself in. I didn't even notice that neither of the other tenants' cars were parked outside. My living situation was the middle floor of a home with 3 apartments in it. There's a side entrance with a stairway that has an entrance to all 3 floors. My being on the first floor meant that I could enter through the front door. After setting my keys and stuff down on the kitchen counter, there was a manic pounding at the front door. It was nearly 1 a.m. I had no idea who it could be besides maybe one of the other tenants in the house. There's 2 doors, the glass storm door and the inner door. I always keep both locked for safety. I opened the inner door and saw a girl on the other side of the storm door. She was drenched. She was wearing a gray sweater with the hood up, partially obscuring her face. She begged me through the door to let her in so she could use a phone. Before doing that, I first had to feel her out, of course. I asked her if she's lost. She replied that a creepy man was following her around and she needed help. Something about this girl, though, was strikingly familiar. I asked her who the man was and where he was. She turned around and then said, "I don't know." She kept begging me to open the door. She even tried opening it herself. I then realized why she looked familiar. She looked like the girl from the diner that was with that man. So I asked her straight up, "Weren't you at my diner before?" She didn't acknowledge my question. Maybe she didn't hear me, but she turned around once again and started freaking out, pounding on the door, saying, "There he is." I looked beyond her to the street, and I saw a large man slowly walking towards the house. As the man slowly got closer, the girl kept looking at me with a look that would imply she's more confused than anything as to why I'm not opening the door. The man got close enough for me to realize I was right. It was that man from the diner, and this was the girl sitting with him at the diner. I think she saw it in my eyes the moment I realized, and she turned to the man and screamed, "Go!" The man started charging at the door, and I slammed the inner door shut and locked it. I didn't hear any kinds of knocks or bangs. I wasn't about to open the door again to check if they were still there, though. I went to the stairway to go upstairs and knock on the upstairs tenant's door. The stairway is separated from the 3 apartments by a door on each level. After knocking a bunch of times, nobody answered. I tried the same thing at the downstairs door. No answer either. This was when I looked out the windows and realized none of their cars were here tonight. I was alone in the house. I went back up to my apartment and then locked the stairway door. My mind was racing, conjuring up possible explanations. The most obvious explanation was that it was a trap to get me to open the door so that they could rob me, or worse. It suddenly made sense why that man asked me if I lived alone. I had to just sit on the couch for a few minutes and think. All I could hear was the sound of the pouring rain outside. I thought about calling the police, but chose not to in that moment. After a few minutes, I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth and get ready for bed when I heard a knocking sound. I left the bathroom to listen, and I was right. It was a knocking sound. It was coming from the stairway door. I walked over to it, thinking it was one of the tenants. I said, "Who is it?" There was no verbal response, but whoever it was knocked again. I said both of the other tenants' names. No response. The only thing I could say is, "If you don't identify yourself, I'm calling the police." I practically screamed it. They heard me for sure. They knocked once again. So I yelled, "What do you want?" And a voice from the other side said, "Your blood on me." I ran to my room and locked myself inside and called the police. I hid in my closet while I was on the phone, and I stayed in there. The sounds of the rain, wind, and thunder outside constantly startled me. I worried about any little sound coming from inside the house. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life before I was told to let the police inside the house at the front door. They wrote a report of everything. They checked the front and backyard. Then they suggested I find another place to sleep for a few nights. I took that advice and packed a bag real quick while they were there, and then left to drive to my parents' house for the night. I returned the next day to the house. There was a knock at the stairway door, and this time it was actually my neighbor from upstairs. I opened the door, and he pointed at the door and asked, "What's this about?" I was horrified to see a message on the door saying, "Thanks for the service, Beth." It was written in marker. I couldn't stay there for a while. I had to stay with my parents for a few weeks until this blew over. I got a new apartment pretty close by the following month. Better safe than sorry. My family has a little vacation home in Colorado. My parents are avid skiers, which was the motivating factor behind that purchase. The home has been in the family since before I was born. It's definitely showing its age in a lot of ways, but it's also like 40 years old. It's not going to look new. My dad's had to do a lot of upkeep on the place over the years. It's still in our family today, and it's really on its way out at this point. My dad talks about knocking it down and putting up a new place, but I don't really get involved in his decision. This story takes place like 15 years ago when I was 8 and my brother was 11. We were up in Colorado during a blizzard. The snowfall was insane, and of course, my brother and I had to go out and play in it. The great thing about going up there when we were kids was the sheer amount of space. The property has a huge opening with woods surrounding in all directions. There's a dead-end road that goes downhill which leads to a few more, almost equally big properties. It's the perfect layout for hide-and-seek or snowball fights or any number of games like that. My brother Josh and I went out in our snow gear to play our snowball fight game with our own little custom rules. Basically, we'd set up 2 forts. We could pick our forts to be anywhere, but we had to tell each other where we were picking. We would then make one giant snowball as the so-called jewel that we'd have to successfully steal from the other base and bring back to ours. Josh chose to make his base on the nearest neighboring property. There was almost never a car, like 9 times out of 10 that we'd go there, so we'd often play games on their property too since they were never there. What we'd do is build little walls to emulate a fort, and then put the big snowball behind the walls. So to get to each other's bases in this game, we could either cut through the woods or take the road up or down to get to the opposite fort. Once Josh ran down the road and disappeared, I was supposed to wait for him to blow the whistle to signal that the game began. I waited for a while, like a long while, over 5 minutes. He had already set up his fort by then, so all he had to do was get back down there and blow the whistle. When it hit around maybe the 10-minute mark is when I decided I probably just couldn't hear the whistle from there, so I started plotting my route. Was it better to go through the woods or down the road? I opted for the road because honestly, going through the woods during a blizzard at 8 years old was a scary thought. I started trudging through the unplowed snow on the ground as flakes of snow blew into my face. With the amount of layers my mom made me put on though, I wasn't cold at all. As I approached the driveway to the neighboring property, I looked through the trees and didn't see Josh over there. With all the brush and trees bare in the winter, it was quite easy to see through the woods. So I cut into the property through the trees to kind of sneak in, but Josh was literally nowhere in sight. I saw his fort, so I looked around, and when I could confirm he wasn't anywhere in sight, I approached his fort to grab the jewel. Before I could, I heard a woman's voice yelling out, "Excuse me, are you looking for your brother?" I turned in the direction it came from, and it was an older woman at the front door of the neighbor's house. I called back that we're playing a game. She responded with, "Your brother's in here." I was very confused. I started walking towards the front steps of the house, and as I got closer, the woman's face got clearer. To my 8-year-old mind, she looked a lot older than she probably was. As I got closer to the house, I noticed at one of the upstairs windows, there was someone looking out at me. For a second, I actually thought it was Josh. It was someone with half their face covered, presumably by a black beanie, and the bottom part of their face covered under the bottom of the window. I also noticed another trail of footprints leading to the front door. They had to be Josh's. The woman was giving me a very creepy smile. I remember that feeling of my heart dropping for some reason. She waved me inside to come in and get out of the cold. I stopped dead in my tracks and screamed, "Josh!" but there was no response. The woman stopped smiling. She didn't expect me to do that. I also noticed that the other trail of footprints was doubled over. If it was Josh, his footprints turned around and headed back towards the woods. I then heard heavy footsteps from inside the house. They sounded like they were upstairs coming down. I started to run, and the woman screamed something at me or someone else that I didn't understand. I looked back once at the house, and that face that was upstairs at the window before was no longer there. I ran off the property back on the road, running through my previous footsteps. I started to hear my dad's whistling from up the hill, the whistling he'd do to get my brother and I home at dinner time. When I made it back to our driveway, my dad and Josh were there already, having been on their way to get me. Before I could even try to explain what just happened, Josh was already telling me that there were people in the neighbor's house telling him to come inside. I said the same exact thing happened to me, so my dad went down there with some kind of weapon in his hand while we waited in the home with our mom. He came back after a long while and said that the front door was locked and no one was answering, so we went to another neighbor's house, and they knew the owners of the house and they called them. This part still gives me chills whenever my dad mentions what he was told. The owners of that house were not there that weekend. Nobody was supposed to be in the house. The cops were called and everything, and my brother and I did have to speak to one of the officers on scene to describe the woman. After that, we were no longer involved. According to my dad, the back door was unlocked and the house was investigated, which turned up nothing. For this reason, my parents took home any extra valuable things in fear of a break-in while we were gone. After that day, we steered clear of playing on that property, just from the creepiness factor of that memory alone. Thank God we didn't go in that house. I've been skiing for as long as I've been able to walk. My parents used to ski competitively. That's actually how they met. So it was really important to them that my siblings and I learned as early as possible. Fast forward about 20 odd years, and that's how old I am now. This story happened to me a few winters ago when I was 21 years old. I was a senior in college. Everyone knows the best skiing accessible to the Northeast is Vermont. It was going to be a trip like any other. It was me, Jaden, Rylan, and Amir. I can't remember for the life of me what mountain we were skiing that trip, as Jaden had booked the whole thing and Rylan was driving. What I do remember was that it was massive, with like 7 ski lifts covering all the different peaks. If I had to guess, it was Killington. We skied nearly 2 full days, and I'm sure there were still trails we missed. That's how big it was. It was the second day. After skiing the day before, We had a pretty good grasp on the trails we enjoyed, so this day would mostly be about testing ourselves and pushing the limits, as per tradition. I'd also be lying if I said we didn't have a handful of fireball shooters to liven things up. We were having an extremely enjoyable trip. The double blacks never got boring, and racing down each slope was its own little game. We had maybe an hour left until the lifts closed. We were all exhausted, but we knew as soon as we hit the road to head home, we'd instantly miss the mountain again. We were contemplating how we would end the trip at the top of the lift when two girls without their helmets made their way over to us. Now, this might sound a little odd to some people, but I wouldn't be doing this story justice if I left out this detail. The girls, one brunette and one blonde, were drop-dead gorgeous, and I don't say that in any type of strange way. They were just objectively two of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen in person. It was disarming. They introduced themselves as Taylor and Devin, and we started making small talk. They basically told us that they were bored because the mountain was full of older folk, which was actually something I had remarked to my friends about the day before, so it made sense why they approached us. A group of young guys that seemed around their age. Devin seemed like a really seasoned skier, as she kept asking Amir all these technical questions about his skis. Him and Rylan actually own their own expensive skis as opposed to renting like Jaden and I always did, which the girls seemed to be impressed with. Taylor made a comment about our shooters, and we jokingly told them that the alcohol unlocked our true ski potential or something dumb like that, which they found funny. To our surprise, Devin pulled out an unmarked bottle and taunted us, calling us bitches for sticking to a drink as tame as Fireball. The four of us welcomed the challenge and happily swigged some of their bottle, which I could tell sent Rylan a little over the edge. He tends to drink more than he could handle, so this wasn't too surprising. I made a note not to drink too much because something about this whole situation just rubbed me the wrong way. I still had trouble believing that these two girls would want anything to do with some dumb kids like us, especially since we were all wearing helmets and our faces weren't exactly visible. Things were going really well though. Amir was being his usual overly flirtatious self, but Taylor seemed like she was into it, so I didn't complain. I figured we were just going to spend the remainder of our time on the slope with these girls, which I didn't really mind too much. Hell, maybe they knew something we could do after the slopes closed. Just then, Devin asked us if we had skied down a trail called Devil's Forest, a name which I definitely didn't recognize. Our other friend Chase would have had the trail map memorized as he's literally a walking GPS, but he wasn't with us. We told them we hadn't, and they explained that it was a glade trail that's a little obscure and rarely open. For those who don't know, glades are basically trails that extend in between trees so that you're skiing through a forest. We actually enjoyed skiing glades more than anything else, so this Devil's Forest trail piqued our interest. We told them we were game, and they motioned for us to follow them. We reached a choke point on our skis, and they told us to take them off because we had to walk slightly uphill for a short while. I could tell we were in a relatively desolate part of the mountain, as the snow was perfectly fresh and there was no one around. The thought of an adventure was kind of invigorating though, so I thought nothing of it. Drunk and curious, we clipped our skis off and followed the girls up the mountain. Amir and Rylan ran ahead, presumably to flirt some more with them, and Jaden and I hung back a little bit to give them some space. As we followed, I could tell Jaden looked a little wary, so I asked him what was on his mind. I like to think of us as the rational, level-headed ones in the group. Amir was too unpredictable and impulsive, and Rylan would follow a girl if she led him off a cliff. Jaden said that it was weird that this supposed trail would be inaccessible from a ski lift, which I agreed with. I had never had to walk uphill to reach a trail before. We agreed to just keep a keen eye on things. What could two girls do to a group of four big guys anyway? They led us into the forest, and the terrain finally started leveling out. Jaden and I caught up with the group, and it was apparent that Rylan and Amir had both made considerable progress. Rylan had his arm around Devin, who was smiling and laughing. They pointed in the same direction we had been traveling, which had all of a sudden become a downward slope. I sighed, knowing this was another instance where we could have used Chase's help. He would have known exactly where we were and where this trail would have led. Jaden was still skeptical and asked the girls if they were sure that this was a real trail. They responded yes and told us that it would also take us right back to the lifts. Before I could say anything, Devin pulled the bottle out again and told us we had to finish it. Amir and Rylan happily took some hefty swigs, but when the bottle got around to Jaden, he said he was drunk enough. As soon as he spoke, I could have sworn Devin's smile became a really angry scowl for a split second, but by the time I blinked, she was smiling again. I must have been the only one to notice because I looked around at my friends and their expressions were all normal. She put on a seductive smile and batted her eyes at Jaden, asking him nicely. He reluctantly grabbed the bottle, if just to shut her up. By the time it got to me, I put the bottle up to my mouth but didn't actually drink. Everything about this encounter was triggering alarm bells suddenly in my head. I handed the bottle back to Devin, who put it away. I noted that neither girl drank this time around. It dawned on me that I hadn't seen either one of them drink anything this whole time. I checked my phone, half an hour until the lifts closed. I tried to come up with some excuse for why we couldn't ski this trail, saying that we wouldn't have enough time to get back up and down the mountain to where we had parked. The girls insisted that we'd have enough time and that the lifts were connected on the bottom anyway. Then, without warning, they told us that we were wasting too much time and took off toward the slope, telling us to follow them if we could. Amir and Rylan immediately followed, clearly hoping for a favorable outcome at the bottom. Jaden and I obviously didn't want to, but figured we had no choice but to follow, so that's what we did. I let Jaden lead the way, because after all, this was still a challenging looking slope, and skiing in the forest is no joke. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but when we made it to the bottom, I was relieved. The four of them were at the bottom of the slope, laughing and flirting like they had been before. Jaden and I caught up with the group, but something was wrong. There wasn't a lift in sight. We were still surrounded by forest on all sides. I sternly asked the girls where the lift was, and they told me to stop worrying and that it was close by. Then they said they'd take us there in a few minutes. I relaxed a little, assuming that I was worried this whole time about nothing. As I was rubbing my eyes, I heard a distinct thump in the snow. I opened them to see Rylan, who was literally passed out on his back in the snow. The girls laughed, calling him a lightweight, but I could tell it was more serious than that. Before I could even react, Amir slumped over too. I started freaking out, and I rushed over to them, unclipping my skis. I thanked my lucky stars that they seemed to be breathing normally, but I was beyond horrified. Jaden took a step towards the girls, asking them what the hell was going on. They seemed genuinely shocked, saying they have no idea what was wrong. Jaden took another step before he too passed out in the snow. I stared in shock, still trying to wrap my head around the gravity of the situation. I just couldn't fathom that this was happening to us. My head started spinning, and I was sure that I was next. The girls had stopped pretending by now, and they looked at me like they were waiting for me to pass out. I felt myself getting dizzy, so I sat down in the snow, even though I wanted to stay on my feet. I demanded to know what they had given us. They didn't respond or even move for that matter. I yelled at them over and over again, but they still didn't react. I wanted to get up, but I quite literally couldn't stand. I didn't pass out though. I kept my eyes open the whole time. Eventually, Taylor turned to Devin and said something along the lines of he must have not drank enough. She looked more pissed off than anything. Devin cursed before telling Taylor that they had to go. I was still frozen. After unclipping their skis, I watched them take Amir and Rylan's skis before trudging off into the woods. I had to do something, but my body still felt numb. I couldn't just let them walk off with my friend's skis. I knew they wouldn't be able to move that fast carrying 2 sets of skis each, especially through the snow. Another few minutes passed, and I started to regain control of my body. I stumbled after their tracks in the snow, but it was actually freakish how far they'd gotten, even with all that added weight. Eventually, I turned a bend and saw them in the distance, way ahead of me. I figured as long as I kept them in sight, I'd be able to track them down. I followed for a couple minutes, and that's when things got crazy. The forest gave way to a clearing, which I could see turned into a road. We must have literally been on the opposite side of the ski mountain, which made sense looking back. That's when I noticed the van parked in the distance. I stopped in my tracks at the edge of the woods. The side of the van opened, and 4 big-looking dudes stepped out to intercept the girls. The girls motioned for the guys to get back in the van, and one of them turned and pointed directly at me. That's when I realized I was in too deep, and also felt like an idiot for leaving my helpless friends unconscious in the woods. The guys from inside the van seemed to be debating whether or not they should leave or chase me, and I wasn't waiting another second. I started wobbling back the way I came, knowing I'd be able to find my friends on the account of the tracks I left behind in the snow. I found them, still passed out. I figured Jaden had had the least to drink, so I tried shaking him awake first. After a couple of handfuls of snow to the face, he was awake enough to talk. I told him what had happened, still in shock. We tried waking Amir and Rylan up, but had no luck. Jaden and I figured we had no better option than praying those guys didn't decide to track us down, but they never came. I might not be telling this story if they had. We waited about an hour for our friends to wake up, and when they finally did, we told them everything. We had a million questions. Who were those girls? Who were those other guys? What were they going to do to us? It was chilling imagining what could have happened had I not been quick enough to pretend to drink. Best case scenario was that we would have just woken up robbed, but even that would have been horrible. Something tells me that no one would go to those extremes just to rob some broke college-looking kids. Besides, who really keeps valuables on them when skiing? I guess Amir and Rylan's expensive skis were worth stealing, but it still felt like overkill. Plus, how would they have even known that we had expensive skis with us as opposed to renting? Things didn't make sense. Finding the car was hell. Reporting it to the police was hell. The drive back home was hell. The people running the mountains swore they'd identify those people, but we obviously had to get back on the road and couldn't verify that. The police took it a little more seriously and told us we'd be updated should anything come up. I think it even made local news, but it's been years now, and they obviously never found everything. To this day, we have no idea what kind of roofie they even gave us. Nothing online described anything that was so effective so quickly, especially in a moderately small amount. Our best guess was that the substance was a mix of drugs, which makes sense because all my friends were feeling kind of woozy after they woke up. Those girls and whoever else was behind the whole thing were some sick people. I can only hope it was just an elaborate robbery and nothing more sinister. This is going to sound a little weird, but bear with me. Every winter, my friends Kyle, Ricky, and I have this little tradition of walking out onto this frozen lake a few towns over. It's not some grand event or anything, we just do it for fun. There's something about the vibe of being out there on the ice, surrounded by the quiet stillness that feels almost otherworldly. It's just one of those simple things we've always enjoyed. Call us weird, but we can never get enough of the serenity. If you've ever been out in nature by yourself with the only sound being the gentle patter of snowflakes, you know what I'm talking about. It feels like you've got a piece of nature all to yourself. The photos always turn out great too, which is a huge plus for a couple of edgy guys like us. This happened this past winter. It's April as I'm writing this, so about 4 months ago now. I know what you're probably thinking, but don't worry, none of us fell through the ice. That's not what this story is about. It was snowing pretty heavily that night, which was the main reason we decided to go. It had been consistently below freezing for a couple of weeks too, so we were relatively confident the lake was completely frozen over. I'd personally take winter over summer any day of the week. I bet all my friends would agree. There are about a million reasons why, but one of them is as simple as the snowfall itself. First of all, it's just pretty. What I like most about it, though, is that you'll never find yourself in complete darkness. Even after sunset, the world isn't entirely dark. The light reflecting off the white snow blends day and night, so you're left with this really surreal feeling that doesn't arise from anything else. The moon was also pretty full that night, so that feeling was amplified. Kyle was driving that night. He had a pickup that handled pretty well in the snow, so we just played it safe and let him drive, even though Ricky was usually the one who chauffeured us around. The lake itself is surrounded by a thin forest, so we couldn't actually drive all the way to the water's edge. I don't think forest is the right word. It's really just a cluster of sparsely scattered trees, but it's more than enough to prevent a car from driving through. We parked in a nearby lot and got out of the car. It was freezing out. The three of us bundled up and walked toward the lake. I didn't smoke at the time, I still don't, but Ricky and Kyle both do, so they lit a couple of cigarettes as we walked. I think it was after midnight, but I can't say for sure. All I remember is that there wasn't a soul out there. Not an animal, not a person, nothing. No movement whatsoever besides the three of us. We reached the lake, and as we anticipated, it seemed completely frozen over. The three of us were laughing about something stupid when Kyle picked up a small boulder and chucked it onto the ice, testing its integrity. It didn't even crack, so we took that as an indication to make our way towards the middle of the lake. We obviously didn't go super far on the ice, that would have been careless, but we did venture a decent ways away from the ledge. We We were maybe 100 feet out when something caught our attention. On the far side of the lake, near the edge where the trees bordered the ice, something big and dark was moving. We stopped talking immediately. We just stopped in our tracks, watching. Whatever it was large, hunched over, and moving slowly toward the lake. Finally, we realized what we were looking at. It was a bear. Ricky was the first to say something. He whispered, "Is that a bear?" as quietly as he could. I didn't answer. My heart was already racing. If it was a bear, the last thing we wanted to do was draw its attention. We stood there, frozen, not even daring to breathe too loudly. But then, as the figure moved closer, something felt off. The way it walked wasn't quite right. Too upright. Too human. It also looked like there was something dragging behind it. Nothing about it made sense. It was one of the most bizarre things I'd ever seen. And that's when it straightened up completely, and we realized the truth all at once. It wasn't a bear. It was a person. A person wearing some kind of bear suit. Kyle said, "What the hell," in a low voice, and I was thinking the same exact thing. I know it doesn't sound scary in a generic sense, but if you had been there, you would have been terrified too. I tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. I don't know if I was more afraid or confused, but something told me to stay quiet. The figure kept moving toward the ice, dragging something behind him. At first, it was hard to tell what it was. The snow blurred the details, but as he got closer, I realized he was holding a rope that was attached to the thing he was dragging, and a few moments later, we could see it more clearly. It was a small black bag. It looked like a smaller-sized garbage bag, if they even made those. Either way, it was chilling. We stood there, unsure of what to do. My mind was screaming at me to turn around and leave, but my body felt paralyzed. I couldn't move. I don't think Ricky and Kyle were too keen on turning around and leaving either, because neither one of them flinched. I probably wouldn't have left right then, even if I hadn't been so scared. I needed to know what that person was doing. And then, as if the situation couldn't get any stranger, the man unzipped and stepped out of the bear suit. Seeing him as a person didn't make things any better. He wasn't particularly large or intimidating, but there was something unsettling about him. We watched as he bent down, presumably to pick up a rock, but I couldn't tell from so far away. And then the sounds started. He knelt down holding what looked like a rock and began repeatedly slamming it into the ice. It might have been placebo, but I swear I could feel the vibration in the ice even from the distance. He was trying to break through, most likely to dispose of whatever was in that bag. Ricky tapped my shoulder, and I turned to see him and Kyle moving back towards solid ground. Without a word, I followed suit, and the three of us tried to move quickly without making too much noise. Every step felt deafening in the quiet, even though I knew there was no way that guy could hear the crunch of snow from that far away. We barely made it a few yards when a voice yelled out, "Hey," from behind us. I didn't even look back. I just started running, praying that guy didn't have a gun. The cold didn't help. I found myself starting to get winded after not even a minute of running. I don't know if he followed. I don't think he did, but in that moment, we were in full-on panic mode. We reached the edge of the lake, and at that point, I was gasping for breath. After a very short break, we made our way back to the car silently, and Kyle drove off immediately. None of us had any idea what we had just seen. Kyle said it was probably someone dumping their trash, but I told him that was ridiculous. Who in their right mind would dress up in a bear suit in the middle of the winter to illegally dump their trash? There was no way. Ricky said it was definitely someone dumping a body, but I told him the bag was way too small for that. The three of us talked about it the whole ride home, but we couldn't agree on a definite explanation. We never got an answer. The reason I'm thinking about this now is because my mom was watching TV the other day and an old missing persons report popped up on the screen. It was a child from around our area, and the timeline of his disappearance matched up pretty closely with what we had seen on that lake. I'm not jumping to conclusions. I know it's a long shot and probably just an unfortunate coincidence, but I can't help but wonder if those two things are somehow related. By the time you're hearing this, we've probably reported our sighting to the police. When I was 19, I worked as a camp counselor at a summer camp. The job would be to entertain and chaperone a large group of kids with a bunch of other counselors for 3 sessions for the summer. That meant 3 different groups of kids would come at different points in the summer. Each group would come for 2 weeks, which meant I was away from home for this job for a total of 6 weeks. By the time the last group came, summer was more than half over, and I was ready to finish this job and get home. At some point during the second week of the 3rd session, and the final week of the job for the season, one of the kids in my group, named Todd, wasn't feeling good, so he wanted to go back to the cabin to go to sleep while everyone else was around the campfire. When we got back to the cabin for 10 to 12-year-old boys, I left Todd to brush up and go to bed. Upon exiting the cabin, a little girl, probably 8 years old, was waiting in front. She wasn't supposed to be in the section, especially not alone at this hour at her age. I asked her where her group was. She didn't answer me. I asked her what her name was. She said Willa. I asked her what her counselors' names were. She didn't answer. I took her hand and brought her into the front section of the cabin. Then I told her to wait there. I started to run across the camp to the other activity sections, hoping to find the girls' group. When I couldn't find them, I ran straight for the section with the girl cabins. I found one of the female counselors with a small group of 7 to 8-year-old girl campers, and asked her if she had any girls named Willa in their group. The counselor was certain there was no one with that name in any of the girls' groups, actually. Next thing I did was run back to the boys' cabin where I left the girl, with plans of bringing her to the front office building. When I got back to the cabin, however, she wasn't there. I went towards the back section by the beds and asked Todd if he'd seen a girl walk in there, to which he looked confused and said no. So now in a panic, I ran outside and looked in the immediate area of the cabin for the girl, when suddenly I heard a girl's scream come from the woods. I was beyond shook. I can't even come up with better words to use for how I was feeling when I heard that scream. I wanted to run for help, but I felt like whatever danger she could be in could be time sensitive, so I ran into the woods calling Willa's name. It didn't return any calls back for a while, and I felt like I was hopelessly running into the dark woods, until finally, after some time, and calling the name Willa constantly, there was a scream echoing through the woods, very close this time. I continued a bit further, and there she was, that little girl named Willa. She was standing straight in front of a tree looking at me, as if she were waiting. I told her to come to me in a quiet voice as I slowly approached her, but then she turned and started running. I didn't know why she was running, but I had to follow her. She was surprisingly fast, but I kept up. I saw her slow down and stop ahead, though my vision of her was intruded by a few trees, as it was the whole time I was chasing her. I stopped and hid behind a tree, thinking maybe I could sneak up on her and grab her if I was quiet enough. And I noticed something in the near distance. It was some small, dim red light waving around behind some foliage. The girl then ran over to the light and apparently ducked down out of sight. I was trying to put the pieces together, just as I saw some larger figure emerge from where the girl had just disappeared to. And this figure was crouch walking in my direction. I was able to put 2 and 2 together and assume this was some kind of trap. So I turned and sprinted all the way back to the campgrounds and ran straight for the main office. I spoke with the camp coordinator, Jackie, told her about the suspicious activity that just took place, and advised that all camp activity should be cut short for the night. Any incident like this would be treated very seriously for the safety of the children and the well-being of the camp's reputation. Authorities had been alerted about suspicious activity on the campground. They came, I helped them with their report, and they left. By morning, everything was back to normal. The season was over before we knew it, and that was that. I have my own theories of what I witnessed in the woods that night. The most logical has to be the possibility that a man was using that little girl, maybe his daughter, as some kind of bait to lure unsuspecting victims into the woods. And what would happen next? I have no idea. I'm glad I didn't find out. I've been through a lot of hellish experiences in my life, but this one takes the cake. It was about 20 years ago, so I was, I believe, around 20 years old. This was way before cell phones and navigation garments. I was working off the books for a media company at the time, who were paying me for my photography and videography skills. I had all of the top quality video equipment for the time, which held to today's standards would be like comparing a Nokia to an iPhone. I was being paid to go out into the wilderness and record hours worth of background footage of lakes, trees, etc. They would use this as stock footage for various documentaries and such. I drove about half an hour to find a good place in rural Maryland to do the shoot. Then I parked my car on a dirt road and hiked for a while, finding a few good shooting locations. It was good for me to get sunset and nighttime shots as well, as different times of day created different lighting for the videos. When I figured I had enough, I started packing up my copious amounts of equipment and threw my 2 bags over my shoulders and began walking, and walking, and walking. I started to realize I should have reached the dirt road where my car was by now. There came a time when I had to accept it. I was lost. I had absolutely no way of knowing which way was which. I'd done wilderness shoots before, and never had I run into that problem before, but usually I'd have a compass with me. Not this time. I kept walking for so long it got to the point that I was letting out little cries to myself in stress, wanting nothing more than to just find my car and go home, feeling absolutely helpless. Eventually, after many hours, I came across a small building. It was an old house that appeared to be abandoned in the middle of the woods, indicated by the vines crawling up the sides of the home, plus the broken glass. Continuing to walk around in the woods in the night was the last thing I wanted to do, and seeking refuge for the night made more sense. I walked up the wooden stairs to the front door, which seemed to have already been broken in. All I had to do was push it with a bit of force and I was inside. It was next to pitch black in there, and every step I took, I felt like I was stepping on rubble or trash. I did, however, manage to find the bedroom of the house, which still had a bed in it, mind you, probably a filthy bed at that, but it beat sleeping in the woods or hiking around any longer in the dark. I shut the door and plopped my stuff on the floor and arranged one of my bags to act as a cushion between me and the actual bed itself. Then I tried my best to fall asleep in this dark, abandoned, foreign location in the middle of the woods. It was surreal, and it was scary. The window in the room was broken, so I could hear the wind and bugs outside. But over that, there was the slightest, and I mean slightest little creak from a few feet away from the bed across this tiny bedroom. I looked up, and even though it was dark, I could vaguely see a closet door in the corner. It was moving. It had to be the draft. It had to be. I was letting my paranoia get the better of me in this freakish situation. But then, over the sound of the bugs and wind, I heard something from inside the room now. It was a gurgling type sound, like a throat noise. I looked at the closet again. Something was coming out from the darkness of the closet. I got up to grab my stuff off the ground. Within arm's reach now, I was staring at someone else in this room in this abandoned house in the middle of the forest. Here's my description of what I saw in the brief moments I was staring at this person. I saw a man wearing a woman's wig with some kind of makeup on his face. As for what he was wearing, I didn't really notice that, but I think it was something dark since I couldn't really see it. I grabbed my bags and started saying I'm sorry as I ran out of the house. I didn't know if this was their house or not at the time, but either way I didn't want any trouble. As I ran away from the house, I heard footsteps tailing behind me at first. I think this is when the adrenaline really kicked in, and I suddenly had this insane amount of energy to keep running until I felt I had escaped. And even after that, I kept running, hopping over logs and rocks and twigs, trying to find a road, any road, with the logic that there's only so much forest left in the state, I'd have to run into a road eventually. And finally, I did. I walked down the road, and within 10 minutes, a car passed, and I hitchhiked my way back to my truck. On my way home, I had time to reflect. That house was absolutely abandoned. The door and all the windows were smashed open, there was trash all over the place. I can't use logic to explain it, because it's not explainable. I am grateful I was unharmed, though. My apartment complex sits in a pretty safe neighborhood, so I guess I'm naturally less on guard as far as break-ins and whatever. There was this one night I'd gotten home late from a bar with friends, and though I wasn't very drunk anymore, I was definitely still tipsy. To give a little context on my apartment layout, it's on the ground level and has 2 doors, a front and back. As I entered, I was in the living room, greeted by my dog Chester. Then I passed the living room to walk down a tiny hallway to my room. Chester followed, though he was acting a little weird. I jumped right into bed. I was exhausted. I fell asleep in minutes, and the next thing I remember is waking up to growling. I looked at Chester, who was standing up on my bed, looking at the far corner of the room. I sat up to see what he was looking at, but it was too dark. I had to flip on the lamp. That's when I noticed that he was looking at the closet door, which was cracked open just barely. Right away, I felt a pain in my stomach as I feared the worst. I lightly tapped him to get him to shut up for a second, and he looked at me and went silent. I got out from the bed as he watched me tiptoe closer to the closet. If someone was in there, I had to be ready to defend myself. So instead of opening that door right then and there, I hurried to the kitchen to get a knife. Chester followed me. When I got back into my room, I don't know where it came from. I had a huge bout of confidence overcome me, and I rushed to open the closet door fully. I was shocked, but also relieved to see no one inside. I called Chester an idiot as I went back to the kitchen to put the knife away. When I got back into the room, I saw Chester looking under my bed, growling again. I bent down to take a look, and there was a man hiding under my bed. We made eye contact for a second, and then I grabbed Chester and ran outside to knock on the neighboring apartment's door. My neighbor opened in his pajamas, and I begged him to let me in after explaining that someone was in my apartment. He let me in immediately and let me use his phone to call the police. The intruder wasn't in the apartment anymore by the time the police came and searched the place. If it weren't for my tiny little chihuahua who couldn't harm a fly, I may not have come out of this in one piece.
I'm very anti-dating apps, but I guess I'm biased because of the nightmarish experience I had with Tinder. I've only met up with 3 people ever off Tinder. The first 2 experiences were nothing special. I wasn't excited about either of the girls, and there were no second dates. But compared to the 3rd meetup, oh boy, in comparison the first 2 went phenomenally. I matched this brunette girl named Annette. She had up 4 pictures, 3 of which she was posing alone in what looked like her backyard. The 4th one was in front of a pond. At the time, I didn't see it as a red flag that she was alone in all of her pictures. Honestly, why would I? But she was decently attractive, at least in my standards. So I talked to her, and it got to the point where she asked what I was doing that night. And when I said nothing, she asked if she could come over and hang out. Considering my bedroom in my parents' house is in the basement with a separate entrance, it would work out rather nicely. We set a time for her to come over. When the time came, she texted me literally right on the dot that she was outside. Punctual, to say the least. I let her in the side basement door entrance, and we walked downstairs. I tried to make the greeting not awkward, but right off the bat, first impression, she seemed weird. Her responses were short, her laugh was weird. When we sat down on my bed and I asked her how long the drive was, she laughed. Like, she didn't even answer my question. She just laughed like I told a joke. And as she laughed, she looked right at me, her eyes still open wide. It was uncomfortable, and I already knew I wasn't going to vibe with this girl. I wanted her out ASAP. I turned the TV on in the background for filler, and I pretended to be laughing at the TV because of the constant awkward silences, and she never once batted an eye to look at the TV. She just watched me the whole time. I was able to wrap it up quickly by pretending I got a text about going into work early the next day, and I implied I needed to go to sleep. She seemed like she didn't want to leave. It was extremely awkward, but I managed to get her to follow me out the basement door. When she was finally gone, I had to ask myself, what did I just put myself through? Not even 5 minutes after she left, she texted me, "Are you sure you have to go to bed? I was having fun." I read the text and sighed. I threw my phone on the bed to charge while I went to get food upstairs. When I got back, I had 3 more texts from her, 2 being question marks, the last one being hello with more question marks. This girl was clearly nuts, so I blocked her. Done and done. I went to bed an hour later. I woke in the middle of the night, like I often do. I'm a light sleeper, it's really annoying. Waking up randomly isn't weird for me. I instinctively felt around for my phone to check what time it was, but my phone wasn't by its normal spot on the ledge charging, and I 100% remembered putting it there. So I got up and started looking around for my phone. I turned on the bedside strip of red LED lights I had hung on the wall to light up the room just a bit. I couldn't find it though, and I'm kind of the person who will let that bother me until I find it. I went upstairs to grab the landline phone and bring it down so I could call my number. When I dialed my number, I heard it ringing from inside the boiler/laundry room, which was connected to my room. I entered the boiler room, and there was my phone left on the washer machine, causing the entire machine to vibrate as it rang. I knew this was bizarre because I didn't do laundry that night. I didn't even remember going in there. I picked up my phone to see a bunch of new messages from some random number. I opened the texts to see 2 pictures of me sleeping. Above the pictures were 2 texts saying, "Nice, good job blocking me." The second one saying, "Lock your door next time." And I realized what an idiot I was, that I was so anxious to get her out of my room that I didn't even lock the door when she left. Then I can't say for certain, but I felt like I wasn't alone in the room. Like I just felt another presence, and I had a feeling that she may have been hiding behind the cylinder boiler in the darkest corner of the room. But I didn't go look. I went upstairs to get my parents and call the police. Given that the girl was dumb enough, or crazy enough, to leave a digital footprint, tracking her and getting charges pressed on her was easy. Her name wasn't even Annette. Her real name was Sylvana. Her charges were a breaking and entering charge and a stalking and harassment charge. I of course got a restraining order, and I've never heard from that girl again. I've tried all the major dating apps, and I never really have much luck on them. My friend told me he was having luck on this app, Hot or Not, so I gave it a try. And right off the bat, I was getting a lot more likes, albeit from girls I didn't really find attractive at all. Still, on my first batch of free swipes, I matched this one cute blonde girl named Julia. I'll spare the details of our conversation, but it went excitingly well. It was one of those rare matches where the girl was attractive and very receptive to my messages, seeming like she was actually enjoying talking to me. We quickly moved to Snapchat. I asked her for her number, but she said let's talk on Snapchat instead. I was fine with that. I added her on Snap and she added me back. Her Snap score was low, like under 1,000, so right away I was suspicious and upset that this may have been too good to be true like I thought. She messaged me, and I messaged back being blunt, asking her to snap a selfie of herself just for my safety. I told her there's a lot of catfish profiles going around, so I can't be too careful. She opened the message right away, but didn't reply for a minute. I thought for sure the account was going to block me any second. But instead, to my surprise, I got a notification that I got a snap from Julia. I opened the snap, and it was the same blonde-haired girl from the pictures. Still, I wasn't convinced, so I asked her to give me a thumbs up or a peace sign. She opened the chat. I was waiting to see if she'd block me this time. She didn't respond for a couple minutes, until finally, she sent another snap. I opened it, and it was half her face smiling, holding up a peace sign. That was enough for me. I snapped her back, and then we messaged for a little while. We eventually made plans to hang out. She invited me over to her house, which was across town, not too far away. She said she was home alone and that it wouldn't be a problem. She gave me an exact address. I noticed she had her Snap map on, so I did a little check to make sure her address matched her Snap location, and it seemed to check out. I told her I'd be over in a few. I changed into decent clothes, sprayed on some cologne, combed my hair, and got in my car to head over. I remember thinking I may have overdid it with the cologne. She snapped me while I was driving, asking if I was on the way. I told her yes.
She read it immediately but didn't respond. I got to the house. It had the number 22 written clear as day next to the door. I messaged her that I'm here. She didn't open the snap though, so I decided to just go ring the bell. There were no cars in the driveway, and the grass seemed like it hadn't been cut in a few weeks. I rang the bell, but she didn't answer, so I started knocking really loud. When she still didn't answer, I went back to Snap and tried calling her using that. It just kept ringing though, she didn't answer. Was I just pranked? I suddenly heard a woman's voice yelling something at me across the street. For some reason, I imagined it to be Julia at first, till I realized it was an older woman yelling, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" I began walking back to the street and called back, "I'm meeting someone." She said back to me at a lower volume now that we were closer that I have the wrong house, nobody lives there. I asked the address of the house, and the address she told me matched the address this Julia girl gave me. I thanked her and got in my car. I went to try to message Julia one more time, but she blocked me. I felt like I was played for a fool. They unmatched me on Hot or Not too. Luckily, I took screenshots of the profile before that, because I sent some to one of my friends before driving to the house. When I got home, I sent screenshots to my friend group chat with like 8 other people, asking if anyone knew her. One guy, my friend Darren, said that's Lisa, a girl who overdosed on heroin 2 years back. When he said that, another friend in the group chat confirmed he was right. I got goosebumps because the snaps I got were from a girl who matched that Lisa girl completely. I told my friends, and they thought either I was crazy or the situation was crazy. I'm without a doubt certain the girl in those snaps was Lisa. How this happened, I have no earthly idea. Better question, why was I led to that house? I can't even try to imagine. In high school, I was in a big graduating class, so for that reason, I didn't get to know a lot of my classmates on a personal level. Using dating apps in college, though, I was able to match and kind of connect with a lot of the girls I'd never really spoken to back in high school. I was using my app of choice when I matched this girl, Maria. She was in my grade in high school. I followed her on Instagram and Snap already, but I never really got to know her in high school. I sent her the first message and asked her how she'd been. I talked to her about high school a lot and how it was funny that we never really spoke or had any classes together. She said we should hang out that night. I asked if she'd want to meet somewhere for drinks or food, but she said she's down to just come hang at my place if that's cool. Honestly, I like that idea even better. I told her sure. She asked if my parents were home. I told her no, only my sister. Then I gave her my address. She said she'd let me know when she's on her way. Then it was just a waiting game. I waited and waited for the notification saying Maria sent you a new message. In fact, it was going on past an hour. I sent a follow-up message on Tinder, but she didn't reply. A few minutes later, I checked her Instagram page and saw she posted a story a few minutes ago. It was a meme. Was she ignoring me now? I checked her Snap story, which was posted within half an hour, and she was apparently with her friend, another girl from our high school. I didn't understand. Was she coming or not? I commented on her story, "Are you still coming later?" She opened it a few minutes later and replied saying, "What are you talking about?" I repeated the question, then added a reference to the conversation on the app. She replied, "I don't have that app. Send me the profile." So I did, and she told me right away it was a catfish and to report it. I did so, and I think Tinder automatically unmatched the profile after that. But I wasn't concerned about someone using this girl's pictures. I was concerned someone had my address and knew my parents weren't home. I made sure every door was locked. I truly was expecting something to happen that night, but it was getting pretty late, and I was starting to feel a little more relaxed. When my guard was down, that's when it happened. A horrific scream from my little sister's room. I jumped off the couch to go run to her room. She opened the door just as I made it to the room, and we met at the doorway. She had this horrified look on her face, like she just saw a demon. She screamed that there's someone outside her window. I couldn't believe it. She ran upstairs while I went to her window to confirm it. There was no one out there now, but I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I tried to call my parents, but I couldn't get a hold of either of them. My sister slept in my room with me that night because she was scared. I only went to bed after waiting downstairs for an hour, listening for anything possible. When I was finally in bed, that was when I heard a noise. My sister heard it too, because we both sat up at the exact same time. Our parents weren't supposed to be back that night.
I went to lock the bedroom door and then got 911 on the phone. I whispered into the phone that I was certain we were currently the victims of a break-in. I told my sister to be quiet when she started making crying noises. Footsteps approached the door. Then someone tried twisting the doorknob. Then they started banging on the door. And in a deep, angry-sounding voice, a man said, "I know you're in there. I can smell you." The 911 operator heard it, and she told me to hide in the closet with my sister. I waved my sister over to the closet, and she came. We sat in there quietly the best we could, but he kept banging and banging on the door, and my sister cracked. She cried out, "The police are coming, leave us alone." The banging stopped, and we heard the man laugh. Then there was silence. Next thing we knew, the police were outside, and the operator told me to quickly get to the front door if the coast was clear to let the police in. The police then did a thorough investigation of the house, which was clear. The entry and exit point was my parents' bedroom window, which he climbed through off the backyard awning. My little sister screaming about the police must have scared him off. The police recommended we sleep somewhere else, so we went to my friend Joe's house. Ever since then, I always verify whoever I'm talking to from online is actually who they say they are. My dream was always to get my own place ever since I was in high school. I really couldn't wait to move out because I hated my dad growing up and my mom wasn't much better. We would always buck heads and my dad would always be drunk on the weekends, and honestly it was just a mess. As I got older and girls obviously became a factor, it became even more of a problem because there was no way I'd bring any girls back to that household. So because of all of this, I took the first chance I could get and moved out when I was 19 in college. I didn't go away to school. I went to a commuter college not far from home. My parents wouldn't pay for me to go away to school. So I was on Zillow, Facebook, and Craigslist every day for a while, and when I finally found a rental that looked promising and affordable, I went to see it right away. The layout is pretty important, so I'll describe it now. As I walked in, I was welcomed with the living room/dining room area, which was one open space. Then there was the kitchen adjacent to that, which was separated by a wall. Then, to get to the single bedroom in the apartment, you went down the hallway, which also had 2 closets. One which I used as a pantry and one as a storage closet, and then the door to the bathroom. At the end of the hall was the bedroom. The bedroom was generously sized. It fit a queen-sized bed easily. It had 2 more closets, and I fit a couple of dressers and a TV in there easily. I was sold immediately, especially because it was budget-friendly. I moved in the next month, and life was fine. Fast forward a few months maybe. I went out with friends in town, and we ran into some girls we knew. I ended up taking this girl home that I'd known for a while through school, but we'd never hung out in that way. I'll just call her Sammy. We ended up drinking at my place and watching a movie, but that was really all we did. She didn't want to take it further than that on our first time hanging out, and I respected that. We ended up in the bedroom finishing the movie that we started in the living room, and I think we both just passed out from being drunk somewhere through the movie. The next thing that happened was I woke up to footsteps outside in the hallway. It was still the middle of the night. I looked to my side, and I was alone in the bed. I jumped out of bed looking down the hallway, and I saw Sammy in the living room grabbing her stuff off the couch, but she was doing so quietly. She was trying to leave now to avoid the awkwardness in the morning, and I understood that. So I didn't say anything and went back to bed quietly. I heard her eventually walk out the front door. For good measure, I called out, "Sammy?" to no response, and that confirmed she was gone. I got comfortable in bed relatively quickly and drifted back off to sleep. It was probably another hour that passed when I woke to something loud. I immediately shot up in my bed and my heart started pounding relatively quickly. I called out, "Sammy?" again. There was no response. I was honestly kind of scared to get up and check, so I picked up my phone and texted Sammy's number asking if she was still in my house. I realized that was a little weird to do, but I was actually scared in that moment.
I looked at the door, which was still open because I was too lazy to get up and shut it after Sammy left. I was definitely still a little drunk from the shots we were taking in the living room, but I felt like I saw something wrapped around the door frame. My breathing only intensified. I still can't believe I had the balls to do this, but I swiped down on my iPhone to reveal the control panel thing, and I pressed the flashlight button. And with the phone still pointed at the door frame, I realized there were 2 hands wrapped around the door frame. But as if responding immediately to being revealed, whoever's hands they were tightened and then pulled back out of sight. And the scream I was holding in for those 3 seconds finally came out. Mixed with simply screams of dread, I also screamed, get out, over and over. By the time I finally got up, I looked down the hallway, and it looked empty. I flipped on the light immediately. After a few minutes of calming my breathing and just trying to listen for sounds, I built up the courage to check the hallway closets and bathroom, and they were clear. I then moved to the main living area, and trust me, there weren't any places to hide in there. I held my phone as if it were a gun as I crept to the nearest light switch and turned it on. I felt instantly better when the living space was lit up, but there was still the kitchen. I crept to the opening that led to the kitchen, and flicked that light on as well, finally lighting up the entire apartment. There was no one here. I looked behind the couch, I looked under the tables, I even checked the floor-level kitchen cabinets. When I realized it was clear, I ran to the front door to lock it. The weird thing, though, was that I never heard the front door close, and yet there was not a single soul except for me in there. I now tried calling Sammy repeatedly until she picked up. When she did, she sounded tired and confused. I asked her if she was just in my house, and she told me she left a while ago because she couldn't sleep. I didn't explain. I just told her my bad. I thought I heard a noise, and then we hung up. I decided to spam call my best friend until he picked up, also sounding tired and confused. I explained everything that just went down, and he said he could tell I was still drunk. His explanation calmed me down, though. He said I was sleep-deprived and still drunk, and I had a mid-wake-up hallucination. It made a little sense, actually, considering I never heard the front door shut. I eventually could laugh it off and apologized for waking him up. I went back to my room, shut and locked the door, and I actually calmed myself down enough to fall asleep. The next morning, I did another search around the apartment, and it was without a doubt clear. So I went on with my day. But at some point, I thought back to that supposed hallucination I had of those hands wrapped around the doorframe the night before. I walked to my room and examined the doorframe, and I think my heart stopped for a moment when I saw obvious fingerprints left in the exact positions the hands I saw in the doorframe had been. I felt dizzy, coming to the realization that it wasn't a hallucination. I took this picture of it, which I still have in my iCloud years later. I resorted to calling my dad for advice, and he more or less called me a buffoon for not locking the door, but as long as nothing was stolen and no one was there anymore, take it as a valuable learning lesson. Honestly, nothing my dad said on that phone call was untrue. That's what sucks. I don't know who the hell came into my apartment that night, and I don't know why they chose to do the literal creepiest thing they could have possibly done. But after my year-long lease was up, I moved on and upgraded apartments and never looked back. My parents' house never really felt like a parent's house. Not in the normal way, at least. My dad traveled for work constantly, and my mom was always out with friends or staying over my aunt's house, or doing something else where she'd come home late or not at all. I know that sounds kinda messed up, but it was just the reality. It wasn't like they abandoned me or anything. It was more like they were always busy and always somewhere else. So from the time I was like 16 and up, I basically lived alone. I ate dinner alone most nights, I watched TV alone, I'd be the only person in the house for an entire weekend sometimes. I'm an only child, and I think that's because my parents realized after having me how much they valued their own freedom. So in that regard, I did suffer, which is something I feel more now as an adult. When I was younger, I used to love it because it felt like freedom having such a big place to myself. I could do whatever I wanted without my parents breathing down my neck, and I didn't have to share it with siblings. I could bring friends over and play games late, I could talk to girls on the phone without being embarrassed. It felt like having my own home without paying for it. And even when I turned 19 and started going to a nearby college, nothing changed. If anything, it got even more like that. My mom and dad were gone or out more, and I was basically just holding it down at home. I knew every noise that house made too. That part matters because it wasn't one of those houses where every creak freaked you out. It was an older but larger house, and it had its usual sounds. I always just said the damn place had character. So this happened on a night where I knew for a fact I was going to be alone. My dad was out of town for work, and my mom had been talking all week about how she was staying at my aunt's because they were having some big family thing the next day, and she didn't want to drive back late. I remember her telling me, "It's just you tonight," and I honestly didn't even care. That was normal. I told her that she didn't even have to tell me that. I made food, I watched TV, I did the usual. At around 11, I went upstairs to my room and started watching YouTube videos in bed, something I do some nights for hours. My room was at the end of the hallway upstairs. At the top of the stairs, you'd have a small landing, and then to the right was my parents' room, and further down the hallway was the bathroom, the linen closet, and then my room at the end. I had my door open because my parents told me to keep doors open at night, more as a staying alert and listening for intruders type of thing. But I also liked hearing the house a little, like background noise. It made the whole being alone thing feel less intense. I eventually started getting tired, so I shut my laptop and just laid there scrolling on my phone. So I'm gonna just say that probably an hour passed from the moment I shut my laptop to when my phone rang. It said no caller ID on the screen. That was the first time I'd ever received a no caller ID phone call. I stared at it for a second. To be receiving that late at night was sketchy as hell. I ignored it, but it rang again right after, still saying no caller ID. That's what made me answer. I figured if it was someone important, they would call twice. Plus, it's just a phone call. Worst case scenario, I hang up. So I picked up, and at first, there was no noise. I got nervous that it was one of those scam calls that calls to see if a number is active to add it to some call center database. But then I started hearing something faint, and it took my brain a second to process what it even was. It sounded like a TV playing in the background, and what was weird was that I could also faintly hear my own TV downstairs through the door, because earlier I guess I left it on in the living room. I didn't have it on loud, just on low volume as background noise, so hearing TV audio on the phone instantly made my stomach tighten. I said hello a second time, to once again no response. Just the TV sound, like whoever was on the other end wasn't even trying to speak. It was just there. Then I realized something that made me sit up in bed instantly. The TV noise I was hearing through the phone wasn't random. It matched my TV downstairs, like perfectly. It wasn't delayed, it was the exact same audio at the exact same moments, like it was synced. That's when I got this cold feeling down my spine, because there's only one way that makes sense. That would mean whoever was on the phone could hear my TV in real time, as in, they were inside my house downstairs. I tried to force a normal explanation, like it was a friend standing outside one of my windows downstairs trying to trick me, or maybe the call was somehow glitching and picking up on my microphone audio. That can happen, but the more I listened, the more I realized that didn't make sense. It sounded like someone was calling me while standing somewhere in my living room. I got up and walked to my bedroom door and listened. And oh yeah, I was 1,000,000% sure now that the audio on the phone was syncing to the TV. In hindsight, this was dumb, but I screamed out, "Who's down there?" because in the back of my mind, I thought for sure I knew it was a friend or family member pulling something. And then, the line went dead. They hung up. By this point, my mouth went completely dry. I couldn't even call the number back because it was an anonymous call. I walked out into the hallway towards the stairs, and I looked down. I still heard the TV on in the living room, and then a creak. It sounded like the wood floor cracking from the pressure of a person, but if that didn't confirm things, the moment I heard someone clearing their throat downstairs, that's when everything instantly became 10 times more real. I could no longer lean on the glitching phone theory, even though deep down I already knew that was BS anyway. I went to my room and quietly closed and locked the door. What if my dad was testing me? seeing how I'd react in a home intrusion situation, or maybe my Uncle T. So I called my dad, but he didn't pick up. He may have already been asleep. It was like 11:30. So I called again and again, but no luck. I tried my luck with Uncle T, and he picked up on the second ring. I could tell he was in bed. He asked why I was calling, and I prefaced the phone call telling him this might sound crazy, and then dropped the bomb and asked if he was downstairs. I remember vividly his exact response and tone as he said, "Steve, what the hell are you talking about?" When I elaborated, he told me that's definitely something his brother would do, his brother aka my dad. While we were on the phone, my phone started vibrating. I looked at the screen, and it was the no caller ID on the screen again. I begged my Uncle T to stay on the line real quick. I was putting him on hold as I picked up. He said okay, so I picked up the other call. As I said hello, there was the same silence. This time, I didn't hear the TV sounds on the other end. What did that mean? It seemed they had the phone on speaker because I could hear their footsteps. They were moving, and the footsteps were matching the footsteps I suddenly started hearing outside of my bedroom. I prayed with all my heart this was my dad messing with me. Then, my doorknob jiggled, and whoever was on the other side tried pushing the door. Thank God it was an old, heavy door with an old, heavy lock. The sound still synced with what I was hearing on the phone. Whoever was on the other side of the door knocked. I had the sudden thought to merge the two calls, and when I did, I yelled into the phone for my Uncle T, saying, "It's not my dad, get here now." I also yelled that whoever was in the house was also on the phone with us. My uncle seemed to wake up from this, and he started yelling into the phone things like, "I'm coming, you cocksucker." The no caller ID caller hung up the phone, and I heard footsteps move away from the door. This all but confirmed it was in fact not my dad. My uncle told me to stay in the bedroom, he was on his way. I wasn't a little kid, but I wasn't some big brolic man either. I was some skinny 19-year-old. My uncle knew I was in danger. He started heading over to the house. We lived in the same town at the time, but that 7 minutes he took to get to the house was the longest 5 years I'd ever experienced. I heard the familiar voice of my uncle screaming downstairs finally, so I rushed out of the room and downstairs. Having him there made everything feel better. We called the cops together while searching around the house for stolen items. The TV in the living room was still on. Before the cops got to the house, we found the kitchen window to be fully open enough for someone to crawl through. That info was of course relayed to the police, who, when they got there, did what I imagined to be a standard police search of the premises, asking us to lead them around the house, but from behind them. We cleared the whole house, and whoever was in there initially was no longer there. After the cops were done, they asked to see the no-caller ID calls in my recent calls. I showed them, and one of the officers told us that even though it says no caller ID, sometimes they can still request records and trace it from where it came. They said it could take a few days, but they'd get back to us. My uncle stayed over that night, which made me feel safer. We kept every light on like little kids. A few days later, one of the officers called me back surprisingly. The number was traced back to someone I actually knew. It was an old acquaintance from high school. Not a friend or enemy, but someone who had my number and address and such. I hadn't seen him in years. The cops asked if I wanted to come with them while they questioned him, so my uncle and I went since he was there on the scene with me originally. When the guy's dad answered the door and saw the police, he instantly called his son down without question, and I could see it in his son's face that he was nervous. The officer and I asked him straight up if he made those calls. He immediately said no. Then he said his phone had been stolen a few days ago. He claimed he lost it at a party and never got it back. The cop asked why he didn't report it stolen. He just shrugged it off and said he was going to get a new one anyway. The cop told him they'd follow up if needed, and that was basically it. His dad just stood there the whole time watching, but he weirdly didn't say anything. There was no big gotcha moment or arrest or anything. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The nervous look on his face when he came to the door. Was it a look of guilt, or a natural look anyone would have when being greeted with police on your front doorstep? If it really was a stolen phone, that means someone stole his phone specifically to call me and break into my parents' house. And that's without a doubt scarier than if it was him. It was a weekend like so many before. The usual crew was getting ready to meet up at Cody's house to pregame and go out. This was post-college. We were all 23 to 24 at the time. Cody's house was often the spot to pre- and post-game simply because he had a cool basement where his parents couldn't hear us, but also because his parents were chill. It was just the four of us going out to some local bars tonight: Cody, Randy, Jake, and I. When all four of us were there, we decided on who was calling the Uber, and once we did, we were out of there. Fast forward a few hours at a bunch of dive bars and then a dance bar, and eventually Cody and I decided to go home. We were tired. Randy and Jake were staying out later. Cody called the Uber back, I think, and he offered me the pull-out couch in the basement when we got to his place. He came downstairs with me to help me set it up, and while down there, we played a game of Madden. Honestly, I've always sucked at Madden, so he destroyed me and I didn't want to play again. I was tired and just wanted to sleep the alcohol off before I made the inevitable hangover even worse. Cody went upstairs and shut the door, and I was left alone in the darkness. The only thing that kept that basement from being complete and total blackness were the lights from the cable box clock under the TV, the actual standby light of the TV itself, and a slight green glow from a Heineken mini fridge on the other side of the basement. That mini fridge would also provide some weirdly relaxing white noise that would help me fall asleep. So things faded to black as I knocked out like a baby. A drunk baby. I woke up and it was still dark. I didn't know what time it was, but I knew it was still late at night, or super early, whatever you want to call 3 or 4 a.m. My mouth was so cotton-mouthed dry I could actually barely move my mouth. I stupidly didn't think to bring down a bottle or a glass of water before going to sleep. After drinking all that alcohol, it was no wonder I woke up. I just really didn't want to get up though. It's a very familiar and relatable conflicting feeling that anyone who's woken up hungover and thirsty has felt. I tried to ignore it at first. I rolled over to get a look at the Heineken fridge to see if anything was in there, but it was just alcohol. And then, for whatever reason, my eyes darted to the other corner of the room. I felt like my eyes were playing tricks on me at first, but I could swear I was looking at a black mass in the corner of the room. A black mass that I didn't remember seeing there ever before. I tried to wait for my eyes to adjust better to the dark, expecting the black mass to be some coat on a coat rack or something. But the longer I stared, the more I realized it was moving. It was a person. The amount of restraint I had to not scream was insane. I didn't think it was Cody just based on the sheer height of the mass alone. Without panicking, I had to figure out how to get out of there. After a tense couple of minutes, I sat up and fake yawned as if I was stretching, pretending I didn't notice that person in the corner. I then started fake talking to myself, like muttering complaints about not bringing water down here. Anything to give the appearance that I was oblivious and just going to get water, not run away and alert anyone. I got up and walked closer to the stairs, but also closer to the figure in the corner. And perhaps the most tense moment of my life was when I turned to the right to get to the stairs, and I hoped I wasn't grabbed. When I started going up the stairs, I didn't run or anything. I took it slow and normal to not draw suspicion. But when I was about halfway up, I took a curious glance down the stairs, and that black mass was now at the bottom of the stairs, and I can confirm it was a person. I almost tripped as I started to run up the rest of the stairs and slam the basement door shut. I then started running up the stairs to the upper level of the house to Cody's room, where I shook him awake and yelled at him that there's someone in the basement and that he needs to wake up his dad. And during that commotion, I heard a slam from downstairs, and I yelled, "See?" Cody got up, and we went to his parents' room where we woke up his dad, and I told him there's someone in the basement. He got right out of bed without asking questions and ran down both flights of stairs to the basement, noting that the basement door was wide open. And when I mentioned I shut the basement door, Cody's dad yelled at Cody to call the cops, and he did. We also noticed the back door to the house was now open. So when the three of us were done looking through the basement, we all went to the backyard to search. Then the front yard, and then the neighboring yards, all while Cody was still describing what was going on to the 911 operator. I'd say we were searching for 15 minutes before the police finally arrived, and then they did their full search and formally wrote up a report for the incident. By the end of it, there were some neighbors waking up and coming outside asking if everything was okay. By that point, I was sobered up, terrified, and wanted to go home. So as soon as the cops left, I went inside to talk with them for a bit, then I said goodbye and called an Uber home, refusing Cody's offer to drive me home. I worried for them a bit that night, but I was not sleeping in that basement after that. In fact, I never did again. We'd still have pre-games and stuff there, but the feeling in that basement changed for a while after that night, where I'd always glance at that corner of the basement and just think back to that night. That black mass.
Our houses are usually the one place we can call home and feel isolated from the outside world. At least until someone or something from the outside world enters without consent. I've taken 3 very long, supposedly true horror stories that I've either found on the internet or were shared to me and condensed the stories to fit a nicer length video. Number 1. 19-year-old single child Damian Andrews would drive directly from campus after his last class on Friday to his job at a gas station for 6 hours, and after his shift was done, he'd go back to his parents' house. Usually his parents weren't home on weekend nights, as they were the ones who were more often out drinking. Damian pulled into the empty driveway, and as expected, everything was dark in the house. He needed to put his bike that was still in his trunk back into the shed in the backyard, so he removed the bike from the trunk of his truck and rode it down the pavement past the fence and to the shed. When he shut the shed door, he noticed the bathroom light upstairs in the house was on now. He didn't remember noticing the bathroom light being on when he passed the side of the house, so he assumed that maybe one of his parents stayed home for the night. Damian entered the house through the back door, and as he opened his mouth ready to call for one of his parents, something deep down told him not to. Damian went up the half flight of stairs from his den to the midsection of the house. He looked up the short stairway to the upstairs and saw a light creeping into the hallway through the closed bathroom door. So somebody was in there. He went upstairs calling out Mom and Dad. There were no responses, but he was in very close range of the bathroom now, which made it odd. He approached the bathroom door, again calling out Mom and Dad. No response. Damian figured maybe his mom was in the bathtub with earbuds in or something. The door was locked, so one of them had to be in there. When the phone rang, he went downstairs to answer it, to find out it was his dad calling, checking in to make sure Damian made it home okay. His dad sounded drunk as usual per Friday nights, so Damian questioned him as to why he left Mom at home as he walked back upstairs to the bathroom door. His dad seemed confused. Then he noticed at the bottom of the door, through the opening, 2 shadow outlines of feet standing by the door. Literally facing the door right on top of it. Then Damian's dad dropped a bomb and told him that his mother was right beside him at the table. He did the only logical thing he could do. He ran outside, hung up on his dad, and called the police. When Damian looked up to the bathroom window, he saw the light turn off. 10 minutes of hiding in the bushes later, he heard the police out front, who in the end found nobody in the house. Number 2. The protagonist's name was not given in this story, so I'll refer to him as Ted. Ted was 16 years old, and he lived with his dad and brother at their isolated farmhouse. The house was relatively small, with a first floor and a basement. However, it was a huge amount of property with a barn and trees in all directions, providing optimal privacy. There was a long driveway that extended from the side road to the property, which was what Ted was riding down at the moment, returning from his friend's house on his bike. Ted rode into the barn where the family keeps all the bikes, and then headed for the front door of the house. However, on his way, he noticed the basement doors were wide open. Not seeing any cars in the driveway, Ted assumed it was his little brother who, for whatever reason, left them open. Shutting the doors and stepping down into the basement, Ted quickly realized none of the lights in the basement were on.
He called for his little brother Andrew, who answered from upstairs. Andrew came rushing downstairs, turning on the light on the way. The first thing Andrew pointed out was the foul stench in the basement, but Ted said he couldn't notice anything. Ted questioned Andrew as to why he opened the basement doors and then left them that way. His response was, "I didn't." Ted continually accused him of either lying or forgetting, but Andrew swore he hadn't even been in the basement all night. The disturbing thought that it was left unlocked and somebody entered the house came up, and the two subsequently turned the basement practically upside down looking for anyone, turning up nothing. Andrew said he had been in the living room all night and hadn't heard anything, plus he would have noticed if somebody had come upstairs. So Ted felt at ease knowing nobody was in the house. He sat down on the basement couch and started watching TV. That's when he noticed the couch felt kind of weird, less soft than usual. He got up and lifted one of the cushions and screamed. Ted ran upstairs, running into Andrew halfway up, shoving him the rest of the way and locking the basement door behind him. When Ted could finally get some words out, he told Andrew he found a dead body stuffed below the cushions of the basement couch. The body was later determined to be that of their closest neighbor George, whose wife had also gone missing a few days prior. As far as Ted and his family knew at the time of the posting of this story, the culprit was never found. Number 3. Edward Gallo was 24 years old and was living alone in his newly bought home in a rural Virginia area where he would frequently have his girlfriend Sarah stay over on the weekends. One Friday night, after going a whole day without speaking to her, he decided to call her and invite her over. She didn't answer, so he left a voicemail. It was odd for her to not respond to his calls or texts, so he was starting to get worried that maybe she was losing interest. After calling repeatedly with no response, Ed heard one of the doors closing from downstairs. He breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that she had come over after all. Ed texted her saying come upstairs. After a few seconds of tinks and thud sounds coming from downstairs, she finally started walking up the stairs. She was walking up really slowly though, as if she were taking 2 steps per stair. Finally, Ed just called out her name in confusion, and the steps stopped. Then Ed's phone began to vibrate, and when he took it out of his pocket, the name on the caller ID was Sarah. He picked up, and immediately Sarah apologized for not being able to get back to him. But he interrupted her and asked her what she's doing on the stairs. There was a long silence, and then she finally said, "What?" Ed asked again. This time, Sarah informed him that she was still in her car on her way home from work. Ed locked the door, and immediately after, the doorknob started turning. All Ed could think to do was to yell, "Get out of here before I call the police." Whoever was on the stairs ran all the way back down and out the front door of the house. Ed looked out the window searching for whoever it was and saw the most disturbing thing he had ever seen. Across the road was a tall man wearing a dress shirt and ripped jean shorts, looking directly at him. And despite how far away he was, Ed could see a smile on the man's face before he turned and ran into the woods to never be seen again.
I'm sure by now we all know what Fortnite is. I had known about it for the longest time, but I never actually played it until my friends basically forced me to download it and play with them. They wanted to play in squads, which is what it's called when you play in groups of 4. My 4 friends were Evan, Xavier, and Braxton. Evan was hands down the best player and basically the initiator of this group match. Xavier was the second best, then there was Braxton. Braxton only spoke on his headset when he was in trouble or needed help. Evan, Xavier, and I, on the other hand, just goofed around and talked the whole time. The two of them did their best to explain how to play to me over the headset.
Anyway, none of this really matters. I'll skip ahead to the important part. Evan stopped talking, and there was a good 10 seconds of silence. Then, Evan, who was leading us from one point to another, stopped dead in his tracks. His character just stood still for a while. Xavier turned on his headset, sounding annoyed, telling Evan to move. His character still just stood in place, and Evan said nothing, but according to the screen, Evan's mic was making noise. Then I could hear background noise that seemed to be coming from Evan's mic. Xavier, Braxton, and I were all telling Evan to move or we'd ditch him. But we all dropped silent when a horrific, almost painfully loud screaming came from Evan's mic. It wasn't like he was screaming into the mic, it seemed like Evan was somewhere in the background of the room. Then, a door slammed shut in the background, and the three of us were left not knowing what to say or do. I told the two of them I'd call Evan immediately, and turned off the console. I tried calling him 5 times, he never picked up though, so I decided to drive over to his house, which was 2 minutes away. I got to his house and saw no cars in the driveway, but the front door was open and the lights were on throughout the house. I let myself in, screaming Evan's name. Evan screamed back from somewhere upstairs. I followed the sound of his voice right up to the loft bedroom, where I found him hiding under the bed. He told me to hide. I told him to get out from under the bed and tell me what happened. He said there was someone in his bedroom. He would speak in very limited sentences for the longest time, until he calmed down and would finally explain in detail. As Evan was playing Fortnite with us, he felt a tap under his bed. He pulled the cloth material that covered the sides of the bed up and looked under the bed, and saw a grown man hiding underneath. That's when he threw his headset on the bed and screamed as he backed into the corner. He says the man emerged from under the bed as Evan was still paralyzed in fear in the corner, screaming. Then the man walked straight out the bedroom door, and that was the last we ever saw of him. At that moment, he didn't know if the man was still in the house or not, so we called the cops, not knowing what else to do. When they showed up, we didn't know what to expect from them. 2 cops actually showed up. The male officer went inside of the house and looked around, while the female officer stayed with us outside with a small pocket notebook in her hand, writing down what Evan described to her. And just like that, the cops left. I stayed over Evan's house that night just to make him feel better. We all still play Fortnite together. I'm much better now. I've never been a huge Fortnite person, but all my friends have been for a while. I always feel like I'm being left out when they're saying to jump on Fortnite and such. Yeah, I've played the game a few times and I get the gist of the gameplay and whatnot. I'm just not good at the game. So one Monday night, I hopped on the game and played alone just to practice. I did that over and over and over, until I started actually getting pretty decent at the game. Then I started to play the game with other players, not my friends, just random people online. I played a game of duos, meaning with one other person on my team. His gamer tag was BobRocket16 or something like that, with a few extra C's and E's or whatever. I didn't write it down. We lost the game, think we ranked like number 20. After the game was over, I got a personal message from the guy, saying he thought I was really good and that we should play again. It was weird because really I didn't play too well at all that game. Nevertheless, I played another game with him. This time he turned on his microphone and was trying to talk to me. I don't have a gaming microphone, so I couldn't talk back. I could only hear him through the TV speakers. Based on his tone and what he was saying, he seemed to be getting annoyed that I wasn't talking to him. I heard him say things like, "Put your mic on," and "Stop being a faggot." Any thought of this guy being cool was gone at this point, and I thought he was just a straight up douche. I was gonna finish the game, but after that was it with this guy. He kept saying stuff, most of it incoherent simply because of my distance to the TV and the noise of the actual game itself. But then I heard him say my name. Not just my first name, my full name. When I heard this, I panicked and thought to myself, wait, is my real name displayed on my profile? But I realized, no, it couldn't be. The guy kept saying things over the mic, but I wasn't listening at this point. I went over to the console and turned it off in a panic. Just knowing that the sound of the guy's voice was gone now made me sigh in relief. I texted my friends and told them about it.
They all seemed to think it was funny, typing their LOLs and LMAOs and whatnot. I put my phone down on the desk as I went on my laptop. The phone vibrated again. I expected it to be one of my friends, but it was an unknown number. The message was hi, and then my full name. I typed back, "Who is this?" The typing bubbles with the 3 dots came up for the longest time. I waited anxiously to see what this person was going to say. The message was, "Is this your address?" and then my actual address. I once again typed, "Who is this?" and then I lied and typed, "No, that isn't my address." The person never responded after that. I started accusing my friends of fucking with me. They all swore they had nothing to do with it though. Low-key, I didn't believe them, but I didn't bother feeding into it. I figured if it is them, the more reaction I give, the more kicks they get out of it. I went to bed ignoring my friends. I woke up to something. I was almost positive I heard a noise. You know how sometimes a sound will wake you up, but you don't know what the sound was because you weren't awake yet to hear it? Well, that was me at this moment. I sat up looking around my room as anyone naturally would. My whole body jerked in startlement as there was a set of knocks on my window. Instead of looking to see who was out there like a man, I ran like a coward out of my room and to the nearest bathroom where I locked myself in. There were no windows in that bathroom, so I felt safe. I actually fell asleep in that bathroom, and when I woke up, I texted my friends again, telling them all to go fuck themselves. They all got a kick out of it, but when I saw them in person, they seemed pretty genuine when they told me they had nothing to do with it. To this day, I really don't know if my friends were pranking me, or if that guy who I was playing Fortnite with actually somehow got my information and came to my house. My 10-year-old son Chris had been playing that Fortnite game all day every day for the past few months, and it had been driving me insane. I would scream at him to go out once in a while. Instead, all I heard was that sound of that bus honking its horn every 10 minutes and constant gunshots coming from his room. Eventually one night at like 9 p.m., Chris came out of his room and shouted out to the kitchen that he was having someone over. I angrily asked him who. He said, "Some guy from Fortnite who lives around here." A fuse went off in my head as I heard this. Apparently he invited over some random person he was talking to on Fortnite. When I asked him how old, Chris shrugged his shoulders and said, "I don't know, he sounds kinda old." I started to freak out, knowing some random stranger who was probably well older than my 10-year-old son was coming to my house. I locked all the doors and turned on all the porch lights. I told Chris to just keep playing his game in his room and not to talk to anyone else. I waited around by the windows until a car pulled up in front of my house. It stopped and the headlights turned off. The door opened, someone came out and started walking up the pathway to my front door. I felt like my heart dropped into my stomach when I saw some middle-aged man, probably 40, mildly overweight, step into the light and then up the stairs to the front door. He rang the bell 3 times. I ignored it. Then he started pounding on the door for a bit. I ignored that as well. He walked down the stoop, looking up through the windows as he walked down the pathway. I made sure he couldn't see me. I thought for sure he'd go to his car and leave, but he went around to the side of my house, out of sight from the windows. He was actually going to my back door. I heard from around back the door being nudged, as he clearly tried to open it. I stayed put where I was. There were no other entry points to the house, so once he gave up, he would surely leave. When the noises from the back door stopped, I waited for 5 minutes in the kitchen, until I thought it was time to check. I wanted to hopefully get a look outside, so I shut the lights and lifted the blinds in the kitchen. There was the man's face, 2 inches from the glass, as he looked into the kitchen, or rather, he now looked at me. I screamed with a shake in my yell that I was calling the cops. I think that scared him off because he walked away, and I watched as he got in his car and left. I didn't call the cops though. Instead, I marched right to Chris's room and scolded him. I grounded him for 2 weeks for endangering not only the household, but himself. That meant no video games for 2 weeks, and after the 2 weeks, he would have to go 2 months without access to his wireless headset. Now that the 2 weeks are up, he's back on the game. I get sick to my stomach thinking about what would have happened if I wasn't home.
Se jævla mørkt det. Jeg ser jo ikke noen ting. Bare ikke på lyset. Nei, det var ikke det. Så du hvor det ble, eller? Ja. Faen, det kan det. İşte. Det er faen meg overalt.
Hi, yeah, I'm there's this guy just like standing outside my window. And he's just like looking up at the window. He's been there for about 30 minutes now. And I have he's male, maybe about, I don't know, maybe about 30, I guess. I can't tell. Yeah. It's in alley. My address is street. Yeah. Yeah, and he's just he's been there for like 30 minutes and I don't know what to do. Yeah, so if you head down alley right off of, you should be able to run right into him. I mean, he's basically right in the middle of the road. Yeah. Okay.
He won't even drive the truck by himself drunk. He thinks you're gonna
Turn the lights off. So catch him and film
the
it.
car.
Yeah.
So if we're out of beer, they got. I guess lock the door.
All right, so they're back there. Where these fuckers at? Where they at? Let me go piss and then we'll go. Hey, faggot. All right, let's go. Let's go. Come on.
Film a fucking dude while he's pissing.
Come on. Salem, so come on. All right, let's do it. Nice, cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right, come on. We should see the car way before we get to it.
What's on the road up? What is up?
Where?
Something on the road up here.
Put your brights on. Put the brights on.
What the fuck?
Turn your brights on, dude.
What the?
That's a fucking person.
Is that a...
That is a fucking girl.
What the fuck, dude?
It's, wow.
Dude, who is that? Is
It's
that...
31 degrees outside.
Dude, is that Kelsey?
No. Dude, that is a fucking girl.
Dude.
Toot your horn, see if she's...
What is this bitch doing? This is a nutty bitch.
Dude, get her.
Stop,
Fuck,
stop.
go check it out.
Dude,
Dude, fuck, dude.
Get her in the car, dude. Look at her. She's hot.
Go
Get her
check
in
it
the
out.
car.
Let's see what's up. Fuck.
What the fuck is he doing?
Get the fuck out! Go! Get the fuck out! Go!
What?
Get the fuck out! Go!
What?
Go, dude!
Hey, go
Get
help
the
that
fuck
chick out, man. What are you doing?
No, dude, get the fuck out of here, man! You don't fucking know, man! Get the fuck out! Here, go!
Are you fucking retarded?
What the fuck? What the fuck?
Get him!